A Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, Book 1, written by George R.R. Martin, produced by Tokibook.com, and read by Melissa Storn. Chapter 61. Daenerys. When the battle was done, Dany rode her silver through the fields of the dead. Her handmaids and the men of her caste came after, smiling and jesting among themselves. Dothraki hooves had torn the earth and trampled the rye and lentils into the ground, while arrows and arrows had sown a terrible new crop and watered it with blood. Dying horses lifted their heads and screamed at her as she rode past. Wounded men moaned and prayed. Jack Haran moved among them, the mercy men with their heavy axes, taking a harvest of heads from the dead and dying alike. After them would scurry a flock of small girls, pulling arrows from the corpses to fill their baskets. Last of all the dogs would come sniffing, lean and hungry, the feral pack that was never far behind the khalasar. The sheep had been dead longest. There seemed to be thousands of them, black with flies, arrow shafts bristling from each carcass. Khal Ogo's riders had done that, Dany knew. No man of Drogo's khalasar would be such a fool as to waste his arrows on sheep when there were shepherds yet to kill. The town was afire, black plumes of smoke roiling and tumbling as they rose into a hard blue sky. Beneath broken walls of dried mud, riders galloped back and forth, swinging their long whips as they herded the survivors from the smoking rubble. The women and children of Ogo's khalasar walked with a sullen pride, even in defeat and bondage. They were slaves now, but they seemed not to fear it. It was different with the townsfolk. Dany pitied them. She remembered what terror felt like. Mothers stumbled along with blank, dead faces, pulling sobbing children by the hand. There were only a few men among them, cripples and cowards and grandfathers. Ser Jorah said the people of this country named themselves the Lhazareen, but the Dothraki called them Hash-Raki, the Lampman. Once Dany might have taken them for Dothraki, for they had the same copper skin and almond-shaped eyes. Now they looked alien to her, squat and flat-faced, their black hair cropped unnaturally short. They were herders of sheep and eaters of vegetables, and Khal Drogo said they belonged south of the river bend. The grass of the Dothraki Sea was not meant for sheep. Dany saw one boy bolt and run for the river. A rider cut him off and turned him, and the others boxed him in, cracking their whips in his face, running him this way and that. One galloped behind him, lashing him across the buttocks until his thighs ran red with blood. Another snared his ankle with a lash and sent him sprawling. Finally, when the boy could only crawl, they grew bored of the sport and put an arrow through his back. Ser Jorah met her outside the shattered gate. He wore a dark green surcoat over his mail. His gauntlets, greaves, and great helm were dark grey steel. The Dothraki had mocked him for a coward when he donned his armor, but the knight had spit insults right back in their teeth, tempers had flared, longsword had clashed with Arak, and the rider whose taunts had been loudest had been left behind to bleed to death. Ser Jorah lifted the visor of his flat-topped great helm as he rode up. "Your lord husband awaits you within the town." Drogo took no harm? "A few cuts," Ser Jorah answered. "Nothing of consequence. He slew 2 Khals this day. Khal Ogo first, and then the son, Fogo, who became Khal when Ogo fell. His blood riders cut the belts from their hair, and now Khal Drogo's every step rings louder than before." Ogo and his son had shared the high bench with her lord husband at the naming feast where Viserys had been crowned, but that was in vast Dothrak, beneath the Mother of Mountains, where every rider was a brother, and all quarrels were put aside. It was different out in the grass. Ogo's khalasar had been attacking the town when Khal Drogo caught him. She wondered what the Lampmen had thought when they first saw the dust of their horses from atop those cracked mud walls. Perhaps a few, the younger and more foolish who still believed that the gods heard the prayers of desperate men, took it for deliverance. Across the road, a girl no older than Dany was sobbing in a high, thin voice as a rider shoved her over a pile of corpses, face down, and thrust himself inside her. Other riders dismounted to take their turns. That was the sort of deliverance the Dothraki brought the Lampmen. "On the blood of the dragon," Daenerys Targaryen reminded herself as she turned her face away. She pressed her lips together and hardened her heart and rode on toward the gate.
Most of Ogo's riders fled,
Ser Jorah was saying.
Still, there may be as many as 10,000 captives.
Slaves, Dany thought. Khal Drogo would drive them downriver to one of the towns on Slaver's Bay. She wanted to cry, but she told herself that she must be strong. This is war. This is what it looks like. This is the price of the Iron Throne.
I've told the Khal he ought to make for Meereen,
Ser Jorah said.
They'll pay a better price than he'd get from a slaving caravan. Illyrio writes that they had a plague last year, so the brothels are paying double for healthy young girls and triple for boys under 10. If enough children survive the journey, the gold will buy us all the ships we need and hire men to sail them.
Behind them, the girl being raped made a heart-rending sound, a long sobbing wail that went on and on and on. Dany's hand clenched hard around the reins, and she turned to Silva's head. "Make them stop," she commanded Ser Jorah.
"Khaleesi?"
The knight sounded perplexed. "You heard my words," she said. "Stop them." She spoke to her cause in the harsh accents of Dothraki. "Drogo, Quarro, you will aid Ser Jorah. I want no rape." The warriors exchanged a baffled look. Jorah Mormont spurred his horse closer.
"Princess," he said, "you have a gentle heart, but you do not understand. This is how it has always been done. Those men have shed blood for the Khal. Now they claim their reward."
Across the road the girl was still crying, her high sing-song tongue strange to Daenerys' ears. The first man was done with her now, and the second had taken his place.
"She's a lamb girl,"
Quarro said in Dothraki.
"She's nothing, Khaleesi. The riders do her honor. The lambmen lay with sheep, it is known."
"It is known," her handmaid Irri echoed.
"It is known,"
agreed Drogo, astride the tall grey stallion that Drogo had given him.
"If her wailing offends your ears, Khaleesi, Drogo will bring you her tongue."
He drew his arak. "I will not have her harmed," Dany said. "I claim her. Do as I command you, or Khal Drogo will know the reason why."
"Aye, Khaleesi,"
Drogo replied, kicking his horse. Quarro and the others followed his lead, the bells in their hair chiming. "Go with them," she commanded Ser Jorah.
"As you command."
The knight gave her a curious look.
"You are your brother's sister, in truth."
"Viserys?" She did not understand.
"No,"
he answered.
"Rhaegar."
He galloped off. Dany heard Drogo shout. The rapers laughed at him. One man shouted back. Drogo's arak flashed, and the man's head went tumbling from his shoulders. Laughter turned to curses as the horsemen reached for weapons, but by then Quarro and Aggo and Rakharo were there. She saw Aggo point across the road to where she sat upon her silver. The riders looked at her with cold black eyes. One spat. The others scattered to their mounts, muttering. All the while the man atop the lamb girl continued to plunge in and out of her, so intent on his pleasure that he seemed unaware of what was going on around him. Ser Jorah dismounted and wrenched him off with a mailed hand. The Dothraki went sprawling in the mud, bounced up with a knife in hand, and died with Aggo's arrow through his throat. Mormont pulled the girl off the pile of corpses and wrapped her in his blood-splattered cloak. He led her across the road to Dany.
"What do you want done with her?"
The girl was trembling, her eyes wide and vague. Her hair was matted with blood. "Doreah, see to her hurts. You do not have a rider's look, perhaps she will not fear you. The rest with me." She urged the silver through the broken wooden gate. It was worse inside the town. Many of the houses were afire, and the Jaqaran had been about their grisly work. Headless corpses filled the narrow, twisty lanes. They passed other women being raped. Each time Dany reined up, sent her caste to make an end to it, and claimed the victim as slave. One of them, a thick-bodied, flat-nosed woman of 40 years, blessed Dany haltingly in the common tongue, but from the others she got only flat black stares. They were suspicious of her, she realized with sadness, afraid that she had saved them for some worse fate.
"You cannot claim them all, child," Sajora said, the fourth time they stopped, while the warriors of her caste herded her new slaves behind her. I am Khaleesi, heir to the 7 kingdoms, the blood of the dragon, Dany reminded him. It is not for you to tell me what I cannot do. Across the city, a building collapsed in a great gout of fire and smoke, and she heard distant screams and the wailing of frightened children. They found Khal Drogo seated before a square, windowless temple, with thick mud walls and a bulbous dome like some immense brown onion. Beside him was a pile of hats taller than he was. One of the short arrows of the Lambman stuck through the meat of his upper arm, and blood covered the left side of his bare chest like a splash of paint. His 3 blood riders were with him. Jiki helped Dany dismount. She had grown clumsy as her belly grew larger and heavier. She knelt before the Khal. My son in stars is wounded. The Arak cut was wide but shallow. His left nipple was gone, and a flap of bloody flesh and skin dangled from his chest like a wet rag. A scratch, Moon of Life, from Arak of one a blood rider to Khal Ogo, Khal Drogo said in the common tongue. I kill him for it, and Ogo too. He turned his head, the bells in his braid ringing softly. Is Ogo you here, and Fogo his Kalaka, who was Khal when I slew him? No man can stand before the son of my life, Dany said, the father of the stallion who mounts the world. A mounted warrior rode up and vaulted from his saddle. He spoke to Hago, a stream of angry Dothraki too fast for Dany to understand. The huge blood rider gave her a heavy look before he turned to his Khal. This one is Mago, who rides in the cause of Khor Jaqo. He says the Khaleesi has taken his spoils, a daughter of the lambs who was his mount. Khal Drogo's face was still and hard, but his black eyes were curious as they went to Dany. Tell me the truth of this, Moon of my life, he commanded in Dothraki. Dany told him what she had done, in his own tongue, so the Khal would understand her better, her words simple and direct. When she was done, Drogo was frowning. This is the way of war. These women are our slaves now, to do with as we please. It pleases me to hold them safe, Dany said, wondering if she had dared too much. If your warriors would mount these women, let them take them gently and keep them for wives. Give them places in the Khalasa and let them bear your sons. Kotho was ever the cruelest of the blood riders. It was he who loved. Does the horse breed with the sheep? Something in his tone reminded her of Viserys. Dany turned on him angrily. The dragon feeds on horse and sheep alike. Khal Drogo smiled. See how fierce she grows, he said. It is my son inside her, the stallion who mounts the world, filling her with his fire. Ride slowly, Kotho. If the mother does not burn you where you sit, the son will trample you into the mud. And you, Mago, hold your tongue and find another lamb to mount. These belong to my Khaleesi. He started to reach out a hand to Daenerys, but as he lifted his arm, Drogo grimaced in sudden pain and turned his head. Dany could almost feel his agony. The wounds were worse than Ser Jorah had led her to believe. Where are the healers? She demanded. The Khalasa had 2 swords, barren women and eunuch slaves. The herb woman dealt in potions and spells, the eunuchs in knife, needle, and fire. Why do they not attend the Khal? The Khal sent the Halas men away, Khaleesi, old Kohollo assured her. Dany saw the blood rider had taken a wound himself, a deep gash in his left shoulder. Many riders are hurt, Khal Drogo said stubbornly. Let them be healed first. The arrow is no more than the bite of a fly. This little cut only a new scar to boast of to my son. Dany could see the muscles in his chest where the skin had been cut away. A trickle of blood ran from the arrow that pierced his arm. It is not for Khal Drogo to wait, she proclaimed. Drogo, seek out these eunuchs and bring them here at once. Silver Lady, a woman's voice said behind her. I can help the great rider with his hurts. Dany turned her head. The speaker was one of the slaves she had claimed, the heavy, flat-nosed woman who had blessed her. The Khal needs no help from women who lie with sheep, barked Kotho. Aggo, cut out her tongue. Aggo grabbed her hair and pressed the knife to her throat. Danny lifted a hand.
No, she's mine. Let her speak.
Aggo looked from her to Kotho. He lowered his knife.
I meant no wrong, these riders.
The woman spoke Dothraki well. The robes she wore had once been the lightest and finest of woolens, rich with embroidery, but now they were mud-caked and bloody and ripped. She clutched the torn cloth of her bodice to her heavy breasts.
I have some small skill in healing arts.
Who are you? Danny asked her.
I am named Mirri Maz Duur. I am God's wife of this temple.
Maggie, grunted Aggo, fingering his arak. His look was dark. Danny remembered the word from a terrifying story that Shiki had told her one night by the cook fire. A Maggie was a woman who lay with demons and practiced the blackest of sorceries, a vile thing, evil and soulless, who came to men in the dark of night and sucked life and strength from their bodies.
I am a healer,
Mirri Maz Duur said. A healer of sheeps, sneered Kotho. Blood of my blood, I say kill this Maggie and wait for the Hellis men. Danny ignored the Blood Rider's outburst. This old, homely, thick-bodied woman did not look like a Maggie to her.
Where did you learn your healing, Mirri Maz Duur? My mother was God's wife before me, and taught me all the songs and spells most pleasing to the Great Shepherd, and how to make the sacred smokes and ointments from leaf and root and berry. When I was younger and more fair, I went in caravan to Asshai by the Shadow, to learn from their mages. Ships from many lands come to Asshai, so I lingered long to study the healing ways of distant peoples. A moon singer of the Jogos Nai gifted me with her birthing songs. A woman of your own riding people taught me the magics of grass and corn and horse, and a master from the Sunset Lands opened a body for me, and showed me all the secrets that hide beneath the skin. Sir Jorah Mormont spoke up. A master. Marwyn, he named himself.
The woman replied in the common tongue.
From the sea, beyond the sea, the 7 lands, he said, Sunset Lands, where men are iron and dragons rule. He taught me this speech.
A master in Asshai, Sir Jorah mused. Tell me, God's wife, what did this Marwyn wear about his neck?
A chain so tight it was like to choke him, Iron Lord, with links of many metals.
The knight looked at Danny. Only a man trained in the citadel of Oldtown wears such a chain, he said, and such men do know much of healing.
Why should you want to help my Khal? All men are one flock, or so we are taught, replied Mirri Maz Duur. The great shepherd sent me to earth to heal his lambs, wherever I might find them.
Kotho gave her a stinging slap. We are no sheep, Maggie.
Stop it, Danny said angrily. She is mine. I will not have her harmed.
Khal Drogo grunted. The arrow must come out, Kotho.
Yes, Great Rider, Mirri Maz Duur answered, touching her bruised face. And your breast must be washed and soon, lest the wound fester.
Do it then,
Khal Drogo commanded. Great Rider, the woman said, my tools and potions are inside the god's house, where the healing powers are strongest.
I will carry you, blood of my blood, Aggo offered. Khal Drogo waved him away. I need no man's help, he said in a voice proud and hard. He stood, unaided, towering over them all. A fresh wave of blood ran down his breast, from where Ogo's arak had cut off his nipple. Danny moved quickly to his side.
I am no man, she whispered, so you may lean on me.
Drogo put a huge hand on her shoulder. She took some of his weight as they walked toward the great mud temple. The 3 blood riders followed. Then he commanded Sir Jorah and the warriors of her caste to guard the entrance and make certain no one set the building afire while they were still inside. They passed through a series of anterooms into the high central chamber under the Yonion. Faint light shone down through hidden windows above. A few torches burned smokily from sconces on the walls. Sheepskins were scattered across the mud floor. There, Mirri Maz Duur said, pointing to the altar, a massive blue-veined stone carved with images of shepherds and their flocks. Khal Drogo lay upon it. The old woman threw a handful of dried leaves onto a brazier, filling the chamber with fragrant smoke. "Best if you wait outside," she told the rest of them. "We are blood of his blood," Kohala said. "Here we wait." Quotho stepped close to Mirri Maz Dur. "Know this, wife of the Lamb God. Harm the Khal and you suffer the same." He drew his skinning knife and showed her the blade. "She will do no harm." Dany felt she could trust this old, plain-faced woman with her flat nose. She had saved her from the hard hands of her rapers, after all. "If you must stay, then help," Mirri told the Blood Riders. "The Great Rider is too strong for me. Hold him still while I draw the arrow from his flesh." She let the rags of her gown fall to her waist as she opened a carved chest and busied herself with bottles and boxes, knives and needles. When she was ready, she broke off the barbed arrow head and pulled out the shaft, chanting in the sing-song tongue of the Lazarene. She heated a flagon of wine to boiling on the brazier and poured it over his wounds. Khal Drogo cursed her, but he did not move. She bound the arrow wound with a plaster of wet leaves and turned to the gash on his breast, smearing it with a pale green paste before she pulled the flap of skin back in place. The Khal ground his teeth together and swallowed a scream. The god's wife took out a silver needle and a bobbin of silk thread and began to close the flesh. When she was done, she painted the skin with red ointment, covered it with more leaves, and bound the breast in a ragged piece of lambskin. "You must say the prayers I give you and keep the lambskin in place for 10 days and 10 nights, she said. "There will be fever and itching, and a great scar when the healing is done." Khal Drogo sat, bells ringing. "I sing of my scars, sheep-woman." He flexed his arm and scowled. "Drink neither wine nor the milk of the poppy," she cautioned him. "Pain you will have, but you must keep your body strong to fight the poison spirits." "I am Khal," Drogo said. "I spit on pain and drink what I like. Kohala, bring me my vest." The older man hastened off. "Before," Dany said to the ugly Lazarene woman, "I heard you speak of birthing songs." "I know every secret of the bloody bed, Silver Lady, nor have I ever lost a babe," Mirri Maz Dur replied. "My time is near," Dany said. "I would have you attend me when he comes, if you would." Khal Drogo laughed. "Moon of my life, you do not ask a slave, you tell her. She will do as you command." He jumped down from the altar. "Come, my blood. The stallions call, this place is ashes. It is time to ride." Hago followed the call from the temple, but Quotho lingered long enough to favor Mirri Maz Dur with a stare. "Remember, Maggie, as the Khal fares, so shall you." "As you say, Ryder," the woman answered him, gathering up her jars and bottles. "The great shepherd guards the flock." Chapter 62. Tyrion. On a hill overlooking the King's Road, a long trestled table of rough-hewn pine had been erected beneath an elm tree and covered with a golden cloth. There, beside his pavilion, Lord Tywin took his evening meal with his chief knights and lords bannermen, his great crimson and gold standard waving overhead from a lofty pike. Tyrion arrived late, saddle sore and sour, all too vividly aware of how amusing he must look as he waddled up the slope to his father. The day's march had been long and tiring. He thought he might get quite drunk tonight. It was twilight, and the air was alive with drifting fireflies. The cooks were serving the meat course, 5 suckling pigs, skin seared and crackling, a different fruit in every mouth. The smell made his mouth water. "My pardons," he began, taking his place on the bench beside his uncle. "Perhaps I'd best charge you with burying our dead, Tyrion," Lord Tywin said. "If you are as late to battle as you are to table, the fighting will all be done by the time you arrive." "Oh, surely you can save me a peasant or two, father," Tyrion replied. "Not too many. I wouldn't want to be greedy." He filled his wine cup and watched the serving men carve into the pig. The crisp skin crackled under his knife, and hot juice ran from the meat. It was the loveliest sight Tyrion had seen in ages. "Sir Adam's outriders say the Stark host has moved south from the Twins,"
his father reported as his trencher was filled with slices of pork.
"Lord Frey's levies have joined them. They are likely no more than a day's march north of us." "Please, father," Tyrion said. "I'm about to eat." "Does the thought of facing the Stark boy unman you, Tyrion? Your brother Jaime would be eager to come to grips with him." "I'd sooner come to grips with that pig. Robb Stark is not half so tender, and he never smelled as good."
Lord Lefford, the sour bird who had charge of their stores and supplies, leaned forward.
"I hope your savages do not share your reluctance, else we've wasted our good steel on them." "My savages will put your steel to excellent use, my lord,"
Tyrion replied. When he had told Lefford he needed arms and armor to equip the 300 men Ulf had fetched down out of the foothills, you would have thought he'd asked the men to turn his virgin daughters over to their pleasure.
Lord Lefford frowned. "I saw the great hairy one today, the one who insisted that he must have 2 battle axes, the heavy black steel ones with twin crescent blades." "Shagga likes to kill with either hand,"
Tyrion said as a trencher of steaming pork was laid in front of him.
"He still had that wood axe of his strapped to his back. Shagga is of the opinion that 3 axes are even better than 2.
Tyrion reached a thumb and forefinger into the salt dish and sprinkled a healthy pinch over his meat. Sir Kevan leaned forward.
"We had a thought to put you and your wildlings in the vanguard when we come to battle."
Sir Kevan seldom had a thought that Lord Tywin had not had first. Tyrion had skewered a chunk of meat on the point of his dagger and brought it to his mouth. Now he lowered it.
"The vanguard," he repeated dubiously. Either his lord father had a new respect for Tyrion's abilities, or he'd decided to rid himself of his embarrassing get for good. Tyrion had the gloomy feeling he knew which. "They seem ferocious enough," Sir Kevan said. "Ferocious?"
Tyrion realized he was echoing his uncle like a trained bird. His father watched, judging him, weighing every word.
"Let me tell you how ferocious they are. Last night, a Moon brothers stabbed a stone crow over a sausage. So today, as we made camp, 3 stone crows seized a man and opened his throat for him. Perhaps they were hoping to get the sausage back, I couldn't say. Bronn managed to keep Shagga from chopping off the dead man's cock, which was fortunate. But even so, Ulf is demanding blood money, which Conn and Shagga refused to pay. When soldiers lack discipline, the fault lies with their Lord Commander," his father said. His brother Jaime had always been able to make men follow him eagerly, and die for him if need be. Tyrion lacked that gift. He bought loyalty with gold and compelled obedience with his name. "A bigger man would be able to put the fear in them. Is that what you're saying, my lord?"
Lord Tywin Lannister turned to his brother.
"If my son's men will not obey his commands, perhaps the vanguard is not the place for him. No doubt he would be more comfortable in the rear, guarding our baggage train." "Do me no kindnesses, father," he said angrily. "If you have no other command to offer me, I'll lead your van."
Lord Tywin studied his dwarf son.
"I said nothing about command. You will serve under Sir Gregor."
Tyrion took one bite of pork, chewed a moment, and spit it out angrily.
"I find I'm not hungry after all,"
he said, climbing awkwardly off the bench.
"Pray excuse me, my lords."
Lord Tywin inclined his head, dismissing him. Tyrion turned and walked away. He was conscious of their eyes on his back as he waddled down the hill. A great gust of laughter went up from behind him, but he did not look back. He hoped they all choked on their suckling pigs. Dusk had settled, turning all the banners black. The Lannister camp sprawled for miles between the river and the King's Road. In amongst the men and the horses and the trees, it was easy to get lost, and Tyrion did. He passed a dozen great pavilions and 100 cook fires. Fireflies drifted amongst the tents like wandering stars. He caught the scent of garlic sausage, spiced and savory, so tempting amid his empty stomach growl. Away in the distance, he heard voices raised in some bawdy song. A giggling woman raced past him, naked beneath a dark cloak, her drunken pursuers stumbling over tree roots. Farther on, 2 spearmen faced each other across a little trickle of a stream, practicing their thrust and parry in the fading light, their chests bare and slick with sweat. No one looked at him. No one spoke to him. No one paid him any mind. He was surrounded by men sworn to House Lannister, a vast host 20,000 strong, and yet he was alone. When he heard the deep rumble of Shaggar's laughter booming through the dark, he followed it to the stone crows in their small corner of the night. Conn, son of Corad, waved a tankard of ale. "Tyrion Halfman, come, sit by our fire, share meat with the stone crows. We have an ox." "I can see that, Conn, son of Corad." The huge red carcass was suspended over a roaring fire, skewered on a spit the size of a small tree. No doubt it was a small tree. Blood and grease dripped down into the flames as 2 stone crows turned the meat. "I thank you. Send for me when the ox is cooked." From the look of it, that might even be before the battle. He walked on. Each clan had its own cook-fire. Blackears did not eat with stone crows did not eat with moon brothers, and no one ate with burnt men. The modest tent he had coaxed out of Lord Lefford's stores had been erected in the centre of the 4 fires. Tyrion found Bronn sharing a skin of wine with the new servants. Lord Tywin had sent him a groom and a body servant to see to his needs, and even insisted he take a squire. They were seated around the embers of a small cook-fire. A girl was with them, slim, dark-haired, no more than 18 by the look of her. Tyrion studied her face for a moment before he spied fish bones in the ashes. "What did you eat?" "Trout, my lord," said his groom. "Bronn caught them." Trout, he thought. Suckling pig. Then my father. He stared mournfully at the bones, his belly rumbling. His squire, a boy with the unfortunate name of Podrick Payne, swallowed whatever he had been about to say. The lad was a distant cousin to Sir Ilyn Payne, the king's headsman, and almost as quiet, although not for want of a tongue. Tyrion had made him stick it out once, just to be certain. "Definitely a tongue," he had said. "Some day you must learn to use it." At the moment he did not have the patience to try and coax a thought out of the lad, whom he suspected had been inflicted on him as a cruel jape. Tyrion turned his attention back to the girl. "Is this her?" he asked Bronn. She rose gracefully and looked down at him from the lofty height of 5 feet or more. "It is, my lord, and she can speak for herself, if it please you." He cocked his head to one side. "I'm Tyrion, of House Lannister. Men call me the Imp." "My mother named me Shae. Men call me... often." Bronn laughed, and Tyrion had to smile. "Into the tent, Shae, if you would be so kind." He lifted the flap and held it for her. Inside, he knelt to light a candle. The life of a soldier was not without certain compensations. Wherever you have a camp, you are certain to have camp followers. At the end of the day's march, Tyrion had sent Bronn back to find him a likely whore. "I would prefer one who is reasonably young, with as pretty a face as you can find," he had said. "If she has washed some time this year, I shall be glad. If she hasn't, wash her. Be certain that you tell her who I am, and warn her of what I am." Jake had not always troubled to do that. There was a look the girls got in their eyes sometimes when they first beheld the lordling they had been hired to pleasure, a look that Tyrion Lannister did not ever care to see again. He lifted the candle and looked over her. Bronn had done well enough. She was doe-eyed and slim, with small firm breasts and a smile that was by turns shy, insolent, and wicked. He liked that. "Shall I take my gown off, my lord?" she asked. "In good time. Are you a maiden, Shae?" "If it please you, my lord," she said demurely. "What would please me would be the truth of you, girl." "Aye, but that will cost you double." Tyrion decided they would get along splendidly. "I am a Lannister. Gold I have in plenty, and you'll find me generous. But I'll want more from you than what you've got between your legs, though I'll want that too. You'll share my tent, pour my wine, laugh at my jests, rub the ache from my legs after each day's ride. And whether I keep you a day or a year, for so long as we're together, you will take no other man into your bed." "Fair enough." She reached down to the hem of her thin rough-spun gown and pulled it up over her head in one smooth motion, tossing it aside. There was nothing underneath but Shae. "If you don't put down that candle, my lord will burn his fingers." Tyrion put down the candle, took her hand in his, and pulled her gently to him. She bent to kiss him. Her mouth tasted of honey and cloves, and her fingers were deft and practiced as they found the fastenings of his clothes. When he entered her, she welcomed him with whispered endearments and small, shuddering gasps of pleasure. Tyrion suspected her delight was feigned, but she did it so well that it did not matter. That much truth he did not crave. He had needed her, Tyrion realized afterward, as she lay quietly in his arms. Her, or someone like her. It had been nigh on a year since he had lain with a woman, since before he had set out for Winterfell in company with his brother and King Robert. He could well die on the morrow or the day after, and if he did, he would sooner go to his grave thinking of Shae than of his lord father, Lysa Arryn, or the Lady Catelyn Stark. He could feel the softness of her breasts pressed against his arms as she lay beside him. There was a good feeling. A song filled his head. Softly, quietly, he began to whistle. "What's that, my lord?" Shae murmured against him. "Nothing," he told her. "A song I learned as a boy, that's all. Go to sleep, sweetling." When her eyes were closed and her breathing deep and steady, Tyrion slid out from beneath her, gently, so as not to disturb her sleep. Naked, he crawled outside, stepped over his squire, and walked around behind his tent to make water. Bronn was seated cross-legged under a chestnut tree, near where they tied the horses. He was honing the edge of his sword, wide awake. The sellsword did not seem to sleep like other men. "Where did you find her?" Tyrion asked him as he pissed. "I took her from a knight. The man was loath to give her up, but your name changed his thinking somewhat. That, and my dirk at his throat." "Splendid," Tyrion said dryly, shaking off the last drops. "I seem to recall saying find me a whore, not make me an enemy." "The pretty ones were all claimed," Bronn said. "I'll be pleased to take her back if you'd prefer a toothless drab." Tyrion limped closer to where he sat. "My lord father would call that insolence, and send you to the mines for impertinence." "Good for me you're not your father," Bronn replied. "I saw one with boils all over her nose. Would you like her?" "What, and break your heart?" Tyrion shot back. "I shall keep Shae. Did you perchance note the name of this knight you took her from? I'd rather not have him beside me in the battle." Bronn rose, cat quick and cat graceful, turning his sword in his hand. "You'll have me beside you in the battle, dwarf." Tyrion nodded. The night air was warm on his bare skin. "See that I survive this battle, and you can name your reward." Bronn tossed a long sword from his right hand to his left, and tried a cut. "Who'd want to kill the likes of you?" "My lord father, for one. He's put me in the van." "I'd do the same. A small man with a big shield. You'll give the archers fits." "I find you oddly cheering," Tyrion said. "I must be mad." Bronn sheathed his sword. "Beyond a doubt." When Tyrion returned to his tent, Shae rolled onto her elbow and murmured sleepily, "I woke and my lord was gone." "My lord is back now." He slid in beside her. Her hand went between his stunted legs and found him hard. "Yes, he is," she whispered, stroking him. He asked her about the men Bronn had taken her from, and she named the minor retainer of an insignificant lordling. "You need not fear his like, my lord," the girl said, her fingers busy at his cock. "He's a small man." "And what am I, pray?" Tyrion asked her. "A giant?" "Oh, yes," she purred. "My giant of Lannister." She mounted him then, and for a time she almost made him believe it. Tyrion went to sleep smiling, and woke in darkness to the blare of trumpets. Shae was shaking him by the shoulder. "My lord," she whispered. "Wake up, my lord. I'm frightened." Groggy, he sat up and threw back the blanket. The horns called through the night, wild and urgent, a cry that said, "Hurry, hurry!" He heard shouts, the clatter of spears, the whicker of horses, though nothing yet that spoke to him of fighting. "My lord father's trumpets," he said. "Battle assembly. I thought Stark was yet a day's march away." Shae shook her head, lost. Her eyes were wide and white. Groaning, Tyrion lurched to his feet and pushed his way outside, shouting for his squire. Wisps of pale fog drifted through the night, long white fingers off the river. Men and horses blundered through the pre-dawn chill. Saddles were being singed, wagons loaded, fires extinguished. The trumpets blew again. "Hurry, hurry!" Knights vaulted into snorting coursers, while men-at-arms buckled their sword belts as they ran. When he found Pod, the boy was snoring softly. Tyrion gave him a sharp poke in the ribs with his toe. "My armor," he said, "and be quick about it." Bronn came trotting out of the mists, already armored in a horse, wearing his battered half-helm. "Do you know what's happened?" Tyrion asked him. "The Stark boy stole a march on us," Bronn said. "He crept down the King's Road in the night, and now his host is less than a mile north of here, forming up in battle array." "Hurry!" the trumpets called. "See that the clansmen are ready to ride." Tyrion ducked back inside his tent. "Where are my clothes?" He barked at Shay. "There. No, the leather, damn it. Yes, bring me my boots." By the time he was dressed, his squire had laid out his armor, such that it was. Tyrion owned a fine suit of heavy plate, expertly crafted to fit his misshapen body. Alas, it was safe at Casterly Rock, and he was not. He had to make do with oddments assembled from Lord Lefferts's wagons. Mail hauberk and coif, a dead knight's gorget, lobstered greaves and gauntlets and pointed steel boots. Some of it was ornate, some plain. Not a bit of it matched or fit as it should. His breastplate was meant for a bigger man. For his oversized head, they found a huge bucket-shaped great helm topped with a foot-long triangular spike. Shay helped Pod with the buckles and clasps. "If I die, weep for me," Tyrion told the whore. "How will you know? You'll be dead." "I'll know." "I believe you would." Shay lowered the great helm down over his head, and Pod fastened it to his gorget. Tyrion buckled on his belt, heavy with the weight of short-sword and dirk. By then his groom had brought up his mount, a formidable brown courser armored as heavily as he was. He needed help to mount. He felt as though he weighed 1,000 stone. Pod handed him up his shield, a massive slab of heavy ironwood banded with steel. Lastly, they gave him his battle-axe. Shay stepped back and looked him over. "My lord looks fearsome." "My lord looks a dwarf in mismatched armor," Tyrion answered sourly. "But I thank you for the kindness. Podrick, should the battle go against us, see the lady safely home." He saluted her with his axe, wheeled his horse about, and trotted off. His stomach was a hard knot, so tight it pained him. Behind, his servants hurriedly began to strike his tent. Pale crimson fingers fanned out to the east as the first rays of the sun broke over the horizon. The western sky was a deep purple, speckled with stars. Tyrion wondered whether this was the last sunrise he would ever see, and whether wondering was a mark of cowardice. Did his brother Jaime ever contemplate death before a battle? A warhorn sounded in the far distance, a deep, mournful note that chilled the soul. The clansmen climbed onto their scrawny mountain horses, shouting curses and rude jokes. Several appeared to be drunk. The rising sun was burning off the drifting tendrils of fog as Tyrion led them off. What grass the horses had left was heavy with dew, as if some passing god had scattered a bag of diamonds over the earth. The mountain men fell in behind him, each clan arrayed behind its own leaders. In the dawn light, the army of Lord Tywin Lannister unfolded like an iron rose, thorns gleaming. His uncle would lead the centre. Sir Kevan had raised his standards above the King's Road. Quivers hanging from their belts, the foot archers arrayed themselves into 3 long lines, to east and west of the road, and stood calmly stringing their bows. Between them, pikemen formed squares. Behind were rank on rank of men-at-arms with spear and sword and axe. 300 heavy horse surrounded Sir Kevan and the Lord's bannermen Lefford, Liddon, and Serret with all their sworn retainers. The right wing was all cavalry, some 4,000 men, heavy with the weight of their armor. More than 3/4 of the knights were there, massed together like a great steel fist. Sir Adam Marbrand had the command. Tyrion saw his banner unfurl as his standard-bearer shook it out, a burning tree, orange in smoke. Behind him flew Sir Flemens' purple unicorn, the brindled boar of Craighall, the bantam rooster of Swift, and more. His lord father took his place on a hill where he had slept. Around him, the reserve assembled. A huge force, half mounted and half foot, 5,000 strong. Lord Tywin almost always chose to command the reserve. He would take the high ground and watch the battle unfold below him, committing his forces when and where they were needed most. Even from afar, his lord father was resplendent. Tywin Lannister's battle armor put his son Jaime's gilded suit to shame. His greatcloak was sewn from countless layers of cloth of gold, so heavy that it barely stirred even when he charged, so large that its drape covered most of his stallion's hindquarters when he took the saddle. No ordinary clasp would suffice for such a weight, so the greatcloak was held in place by a matched pair of miniature lionesses crouching on his shoulders, as if poised to spring. Their mate, a male with a magnificent mane, reclined atop Lord Tywin's great arm, one paw raking the air as he roared. All 3 lions were wrought in gold, with ruby eyes. His armor was heavy steel plate, enameled in dark crimson, greaves and gauntlets inlaid with ornate gold scrollwork. His rondels were golden sunbursts, all his fastenings were gilded, and the red steel was burnished to such a high sheen that it shone like fire in the light of the rising sun. Tyrion could hear the rumble of the foemen's drums now. He remembered Robb Stark as he had last seen him, in his father's high seat in the great hall of Winterfell, a sword naked and shining in his hands. He remembered how the dire wolves had come at him out of the shadows, and suddenly he could see them again, snarling and snapping, teeth bared in his face. Would the boy bring these wolves to war with him? The thought made him uneasy. The Northerners would be exhausted after their long sleepless march. Tywin wondered what the boy had been thinking. Did he think to take them unawares while they slept? Small chance of that. Whatever else might be said of him, Tywin Lannister was no man's fool. The van was massing on the left. He saw the stand at first, 3 black dogs on a yellow field. Ser Gregor sat beneath it, mounted on the biggest horse Tyrion had ever seen. Bronn took one look at him and grinned.
Always follow a big man into battle.
Tyrion threw him a hard look.
And why is that? They make such splendid targets. That one, he'll draw the eyes of every bowman on the field.
Laughing, Tyrion regarded the mountain with fresh eyes.
I confess I had not considered it in that light.
Clegane had no splendor about him. His armor was steel plate, dull grey, scarred by hard use and showing neither sigil nor ornament. He was pointing men into position with his blade, a 2-handed greatsword that Ser Gregor waved about with one hand, as a lesser man might wave a dagger.
"Any man runs, I'll cut him down myself,"
he was roaring when he caught sight of Tyrion.
"Imp, take the left, hold the river, if you can."
The left of the left. To turn their flank, the Starks would need horses that could run on water. Tyrion led his men toward the river bank.
"Look,"
he shouted, pointing with his axe.
"The river."
A blanket of pale mist still clung to the surface of the water, the murky green current swirling past underneath. The shallows were muddy and choked with reeds.
"The river is ours. Whatever happens, keep close to the water. Never lose sight of it. Let no enemy come between us and our river. If they dirty our waters, hack off their cocks and feed them to the fishes."
Shagga had an axe in either hand. He smashed them together and made them ring.
"Half men!"
he shouted. Other stone crows picked up the cry, and the Blackears and Moon Brothers as well. The burnt men did not shout, but they rattled their swords and spears. Tyrion turned his courser in a circle to look over the field. The ground was rolling and uneven here, soft and muddy near the river, rising in a gentle slope toward the King's Road, stony and broken beyond it to the cast. A few trees spotted the hillsides, but most of the land had been cleared and planted. His heart pounded in his chest in time to the drums, and under his layer of leather and steel, his brow was cold with sweat. He watched Ser Gregor as the mountain rode up and down the line, shouting and gesticulating. This wing, too, was all cavalry, but where the right was a mailed fist of knights and heavy lances, the vanguard was made up of the sweepings of the west. Mounted archers in leather jerkins, a swarming mass of undisciplined free-riders and sellswords, field-hands on plough horses armed with scythes and their fathers' rusted swords, half-trained boys from the stews of Lannisport, and Tyrion and his mountain clansmen.
"Crow food,"
Bronn muttered beside him, giving a voice to what Tyrion had left unsaid. He could only nod. Had his lord father taken leave of his senses? No pikes, too few bowmen, a bare handful of knights, steel-armed and unarmored, commanded by an unthinking brute who led with his rage. How could his father expect this travesty of a battle to hold his left? He had no time to think about it. The drums were so near that the beat crept under his skin and set his hands to twitching. Bronn drew his longsword, and suddenly the enemy was there before them, boiling over the tops of the hills, advancing with measured tread behind a wall of shields and pikes. "Gods be damned, look at them all," Tyrion thought, though he knew his father had more men on the field. Their captains led them on armored war horses, standard-bearers riding alongside with their banners. He glimpsed the bull moose of the Hornwoods, the Karstark Sunburst, Lord Serwyn's battle-axe and the mailed fist of the Glovers, and the twin towers of Frey, blue on grey. So much for his father's certainty that Lord Walder would not bestir himself. The white of House Stark was seen everywhere, the grey dire wolves seeming to run and leap as the banners swelled and streamed from the high staves. Where's the boy? Tyrion wondered. A warhorn blew, its voice as long and low and chilling as a cold wind from the north. The Lannister trumpets answered, brazen and defiant, yet it seemed to Tyrion that they sounded somehow smaller, more anxious. He could feel a fluttering in his bowels, a queasy liquid feeling. He hoped he was not going to die sick. As the horns died away, a hissing filled the air. A vast flight of arrows arched up from his right, where the archers stood flanking the road. The Northerners broke into a run, shouting as they came, but the Lannister arrows fell on them like hail, hundreds of arrows, thousands, and shouts turned to screams as men stumbled and went down. By then, a second flight was in the air, and the archers were fitting a third arrow to their bowstrings. The trumpets blared again. Sir Gregor waved his huge sword and bellowed a command, and 1,000 other voices screamed back at him. Tyrion put his spurs to his horse and added one more voice to the cacophony, and the van surged forward. "The river!" he shouted at his clansmen as they rode. "Remember, hew to the river!" He was still leading when they broke a canter, until Chella gave a blood-curdling shriek and galloped past him, and Shagga howled and followed. The clansmen charged after them, leaving Tyrion in their dust. A crescent of enemy spearmen had formed ahead, a double hedgehog bristling with steel, waiting behind tall oaken shields marked with the sunburst of Karstark. Gregor Clegane was the first to reach them, leading a wedge of armored veterans. Half the horses shied at the last second, breaking their charge before the row of spears. The others died, sharp steel points ripping through their chests. Tyrion saw a dozen men go down. The mountain stallion reared, lashing out with iron-shod hooves as a barbed spearhead raked across his neck. Maddened, the beast lunged into the ranks. Spears thrust at him from every side, but the shield wall broke beneath his weight. The Northerners stumbled away from the animal's death throes. As his horse fell, snorting blood and biting with his last red breath, the mountain rose untouched, laying about him with his two-handed greatsword. Shagga went bursting through the gap before the shields could close, other stone crows hard behind him. Tyrion shouted, "Burnt men, Moon brothers, after me!" But most of them were ahead of him. He glimpsed Timett, son of Timett, vault free as his mount died under him in full stride, saw a Moon brother impaled on a Karstark spear, watched Conn's horse shatter a man's ribs with a kick. A flight of arrows descended on them. Where they came from he could not say, but they fell on Stark and Lannister alike, rattling off armor or finding flesh. Tyrion lifted his shield and hid beneath it. The hedgehog was crumbling, the Northerners reeling back under the impact of the mounted assault. Tyrion saw Shagga catch a spearman full in the chest as the fool came on at a run, saw his axe shear through mail and leather and muscle and lungs. The man was dead on his feet, the axe had lodged in his breast, yet Shagga rode on, cleaving a shield in two with his left-hand battle-axe while the corpse was bouncing and stumbling bonelessly along on his right. Finally, the dead man slid off. Shagga smashed the two axes together and roared. By then the enemy was on him, and Tyrion's battle shrunk to the few feet of ground around his horse. A man-at-arms thrust at his chest and his axe lashed out, knocking the spear aside. The man danced back for another try, but Tyrion spurred his horse and rode right over him. Bronn was surrounded by 3 foes, but he lopped the head off the first spear that came at him, and raked his blade across a second man's face on his backslash. A thrown spear came hurtling at Tyrion from the left and lodged in his shield with a woody chunk. He wheeled and raced after the thrower, but the man raised his own shield over his head. Tyrion circled around him, raining axe blows down on the wood. Chips of oak went flying until the Northerner lost his feet and slipped, failing flat on his back with his shield on top of him. He was below the reach of Tyrion's axe, and it was too much bother to dismount, so he left him there and rode after another man, taking him from behind with a sweeping downcut that sent a jolt of impact up his arm. That won him a moment's respite. Reining up, he looked for the river. There it was, off to the right. Somehow he had gotten turned around. A burnt man rode past, slumped against his horse. A spear had entered his belly and come out through his back. He was past any help, but when Tyrion saw one of the Northerners run up and make a grab for his reins, he charged. His quarry met him sword in hand. He was tall and spare, wearing a long chainmail hauberk and gauntlets of lobstered steel, but he'd lost his helm and blood ran down into his eyes from a gash across his forehead. Tyrion aimed a swipe at his face, but the tall man slammed it aside. "Dwarf!" he screamed. "Die!" He turned in a circle as Tyrion rode around him, hacking at his head and shoulders. Steel rang on steel, and Tyrion soon realized that the tall man was quicker and stronger than he was. Where in the seven hells was Bronn? "Die!" the man grunted, chopping at him savagely. Tyrion barely got his shield up in time, and the wood seemed to explode inward under the force of the blow. The shattered pieces fell away from his arm. "Die!" The swordsman bellowed, shoving in close and whanging Tyrion across the temple so hard his head rang. The blade made a hideous scraping sound as he drew it back over the steel. The tall man grinned, until Tyrion's destrier bit, quick as a snake, laying his cheek bare to the bone. Then he screamed. Tyrion buried his axe in his head. "You die," he told him, and he did. As he wrenched the blade free, he heard a shout. "Eddard!" a voice rang out. "For Eddard and Winterfell!" The night came thundering down on him, swinging the spiked ball of a morning star around his head. Their war horses slammed together before Tyrion could so much as open his mouth to shout for Bronn. His right elbow exploded with pain as the spikes punched through the thin metal around the joint. His axe was gone as fast as that. He clawed for his sword, but the morning star was circling again, coming at his face. A sickening crunch, and he was falling. He did not recall hitting the ground, but when he looked up there was only sky above him. He rolled onto his side and tried to find his feet, but pain shuddered through him, and the world throbbed. The knight who had felled him drew up above him. "Tyrion the Imp," he boomed down, "you are mine. Do you yield, Lannister?" Yes, Tyrion thought, but the word caught in his throat. He made a croaking sound and fought his way to his knees, fumbling for a weapon. His sword, his dirk, anything. "Do you yield?" The knight loomed overhead on his armored warhorse. Man and horse both seemed immense. The spiked ball swung in a lazy circle. Tyrion's hands were numb, his vision blurred, his scabbard empty. "Yield or die," the knight declared, his flail whirling faster and faster. Tyrion lurched to his feet, driving his head into the horse's belly. The animal gave a hideous scream and reared. It tried to twist away from the agony. A shower of blood and viscera poured down over Tyrion's face, and the horse fell like an avalanche. The next he knew, his visor was packed with mud and something was crashing his foot. He wriggled free, his throat so tight he could scarce talk. "Yield," he managed to croak faintly. "Yes," a voice moaned, thick with pain. Tyrion scraped the mud off his helm so he could see again. The horse had fallen away from him onto its rider. The knight's leg was trapped, the arm he'd used to break his fall twisted at a grotesque angle. "Yield," he repeated. Fumbling at his belt with his good hand, he drew his sword and flung it at Tyrion's feet. "I yield, my lord." Dazed, the dwarf knelt and lifted the blade. Pain hammered through his elbow when he moved his arm. The battle seemed to have moved beyond him. No one remained on his part of the field, save a large number of corpses. Ravens were already circling and landing to feed. He saw that Sir Kevan had brought up his centre in support of the van. His huge mass of pikemen had pushed the Northerners back against the hills. They were struggling on the slopes, pikes thrusting against another wall of shields, these oval and reinforced with iron studs. As he watched, the air filled with arrows again, and the man behind the oak wall crumbled beneath the murderous fire. "I believe you are losing, sir," he told the knight under the horse. The man made no reply. The sound of hoofs coming up behind him made him whirl, thought he could scarcely lift the sword he held for the agony in his elbow. Bronn reined up and looked down on him. "Small use you turned out to be," Tyrion told him.
"It would seem you did well enough on your own," Bronn answered. "You've lost the spike of your helm, though."
Tyrion groped at the top of the great helm. The spike had snapped off clean.
"I haven't lost it. I know just where it is. Do you see my horse?"
By the time they found it, the trumpets had sounded again, and Lord Tywin's reserve came sweeping up along the river. Tyrion watched his father fly past, the crimson and gold banner of Lannister rippling over his head as he thundered across the field. 500 knights surrounded him, sunlight flashing off the points of their lances. The remnants of the Stark lines shattered like glass beneath the hammer of their charge. With his elbows swollen and throbbing inside his armor, Tyrion made no attempt to join the slaughter. He and Bronn went looking for his men. Many he found among the dead. Ulf, son of Ulmar, lay in a pool of congealing blood, his arm gone at the elbow. A dozen of his moon brothers sprawled around him. Shagga was slumped beneath a tree, riddled with arrows, Conn's head in his lap. Tyrion thought they were both dead, but as he dismounted, Shagga opened his eyes and said, "They have killed Conn, son of Karath." Handsome Conn had no mark but for the red stain over his breast, where the spear thrust had killed him. When Bronn pulled Shagga to his feet, the big man seemed to notice the arrows for the first time. He plucked them out one by one, cursing the holes they had made in his layer of mail and leather, and yowling like a babe at the few that had buried themselves in his flesh. Chella, daughter of Chaik, rode up as they were yanking arrows out of Shagga, and showed them 4 ears she had taken. Timett they discovered looting the bodies of the slain with his burnt men. Of the 300 clansmen who had ridden to battle behind Tyrion Lannister, perhaps half had survived. He left the living to look after the dead, sent Bronn to take charge of his captive knight, and went alone in search of his father. Lord Tywin was seated by the river, sipping wine from a jeweled cup as his squire undid the fastenings on his breastplate. "A fine victory," Sir Kevan said when he saw Tyrion. "Your wild men fought well." His father's eyes were on him, pale green flecked with gold, so cool they gave Tyrion a chill. "Did that surprise you, father?" he asked. "Did it upset your plans? We were supposed to be butchered, were we not?" Lord Tywin drained his cup, his face expressionless.
"I put the least disciplined men on the left, yes. I anticipated that they would break. Robb Stark is a green boy, more like to be brave than wise. I'd hoped that if he saw our left collapse, he might plunge into the gap, eager for a rout. Once he was fully committed, Sir Kevan's pikes would wheel and take him in the flank, driving him into the river while I brought up the reserve. And you thought it best to place me in the midst of this carnage, yet keep me ignorant of your plans." "A feigned rout is less convincing," his father said, "and I'm not inclined to trust my plans to a man who consorts with sellswords and savages." "A pity my savages ruined your dance."
Tyrion pulled off his steel gauntlet and let it fall to the ground, wincing at the pain that stabbed up his arm.
"The Stark boy proved more cautious than I expected for one of his years,"
Lord Tywin admitted.
"But a victory is a victory. You appear to be wounded."
Tyrion's right arm was soaked with blood.
"Good of you to notice, father," he said through clenched teeth. "Might I trouble you to send for your masters, unless you relish the notion of having a one-armed dwarf for a son?"
An urgent shout of "Lord Tywin" turned his father's head before he could reply. Tywin Lannister rose to his feet as Sir Adam Marbrand leapt down off his courser. The horse was lathered and bleeding from the mouth. Sir Adam dropped to one knee, a rangy man with dark copper hair that fell to his shoulders, armored in burnished bronzed steel with the fiery tree of his house etched black on his breastplate.
"My liege, we have taken some of their commanders. Lord Serban, Sir Willis Manderley, Harrion Carstek, 4 Freys. Lord Hornwood is dead, and I fear Roose Bolton has escaped us." "And the boy?" Lord Tywin asked.
Sir Adam hesitated.
"The Stark boy was not with them, my lord. They say he crossed at the Twins with a great part of his horse, riding hard for Riverrun."
A green boy, Tyrion remembered, more like to be brave than wise. He would have loved if he hadn't heard so much. Chapter 63. Catelyn. The woods were full of whispers. Moonlight winked on the tumbling waters of the stream below as it wound its rocky way along the floor of the valley. Beneath the trees, war horses whickered softly and pawed at the moist, leafy ground, while men made nervous jests in hushed voices. Now and again she heard the chink of spears, the faint metallic slither of chainmail, but even those sounds were muffled.
"It should not be long now, my lady,"
Hallis Mullins said. He had asked for the honor of protecting her in the battle to come. It was his right, as Winterfell's captain of guards, and Robb had not refused it to him. She had 30 men around her, charged to keep her unharmed and see her safely home to Winterfell if the fighting went against him. Robb had wanted 50. Catelyn had insisted that 10 would be enough, that he would need every sword for the fight. They made their peace at 30, neither happy with it. "It will come when it comes," Catelyn told him. When it came, she knew it would mean death. Hell's death, perhaps, or hers, or Robb's. No one was safe. No life was certain. Catelyn was content to wait, to listen to the whispers in the woods and the faint music of the brook, to feel the warm wind in her hair. She was no stranger to waiting, after all. Her men had always made her wait.
"Watch for me, little cat,"
her father would always tell her when he rode off to court or fair or battle. And she would, standing patiently on the battlements of Riverrun, as the waters of the Red Fork and the Tumblestone flowed by. He did not always come when he said he would, and days would oft-times pass as Catelyn stood her vigil, peering out between crenels and through arrow loops until she caught a glimpse of Lord Hoster on his old brown gelding, trotting along the river shore toward the landing.
"Did you watch for me?"
he'd ask when he went to bug her.
"Did you, little cat?"
Brandon Stark had bid her wait as well.
"I shall not be long, my lady," he had vowed. "We will wed on my return."
Yet when the day came at last, it was his brother Eddard who stood beside her in the sept. Ned had lingered scarcely a fortnight with his new bride before he too had ridden off to war, with promises on his lips. At least he had left her with more than words. He had given her a son. 9 moons had waxed and waned, and Robb had been born in Riverrun while his father still warred in the south. She had brought him forth in blood and pain, not knowing whether Ned would ever see him. Her son. He had been so small. And now it was for Robb that she waited. For Robb and for Jaime Lannister, the gilded knight whom men said had never learned to wait at all.
"The Kingslayer is restless and quick to anger,"
her uncle Brynden had told Robb,
and he had wagered their lives and their best hope of victory on the truth of what he said.
If Robb was frightened, he gave no sign of it. Catelyn watched her son as he moved among the men, touching one on the shoulder, sharing a jest with another, helping a third to gentle an anxious horse. His armor clinked softly when he moved. Only his head was bare. Catelyn watched the breeze stir his auburn hair, so like her own, and wondered when her son had grown so big. 15, and near as tall as she was. Let him grow taller, she asked the gods. Let him know 16 and 20 and 50. Let him grow as tall as his father and hold his own son in his arms. Please, please. As she watched him, this tall young man with the new beard and the dire wolf prowling at his heels, all she could see was the babe they had laid at her breast at Riverrun so long ago. The night was warm, but the thought of Riverrun was enough to make her shiver. Where are they? She wondered. Could her uncle have been wrong? So much rested on the truth of what he had told them. Robb had given the Blackfish 300 picked men and sent them ahead to screen his march.
"Jaime does not know,"
Sir Brynden said when he rode back.
"I'll stake my life on that. No bird has reached him, my archers have seen to that. We've seen a few of his outriders, but those that saw us did not live to tell of it. He ought to have sent out more. He does not know."
"How large is his host?" her son asked.
12,000 foot, scattered around the castle in 3 separate camps, with the rivers between,
her uncle said, with the craggy smile she remembered so well.
"There is no other way to besiege Riverrun, yet still, that will be their undoing. 2 or 3,000 horse."
"The Kingslayer has us 3 to 1, said Galbart Glover.
"True enough," Sir Brynden said. "Yet there is one thing Sir Jaime lacks."
"Yes?" Robb asked.
"Patience."
Their host was greater than it had been when they left the twins. Lord Jason Mallister had brought his power out from Seaguard to join them as they swept around the headwaters of the Blue Fork and galloped south, and others had crept forth as well, hedge knights and small lords and masterless men-at-arms, who had fled north when her brother Edmur's army was shattered beneath the walls of Riverrun. They had driven their horses as hard as they dared to reach this place before Jaime Lannister had word of their coming, and now the hour was at hand. Catelyn watched her son mount up. Oliver Frey held his horse for him, Lord Walder's son, 2 years older than Robb, and 10 years younger and more anxious. He strapped Robb's shield in place and handed up his helm. When he lowered it over the face she loved so well, a tall young knight sat on his grey stallion where her son had been. It was dark among the trees, where the moon did not reach. When Robb turned his head to look at her, she could see only black inside his visor. "I must ride down the line, mother," he told her. "Father says you should let the men see you before a battle." "Go then," she said. "Let them see you." "It will give them courage," Robb said. And who will give me courage? She wondered, yet she kept her silence and made herself smile for him. Robb turned the big grey stallion and walked him slowly away from her, grey wind shadowing his steps. Behind him his battle guard formed up. When he'd forced Catelyn to accept her protectors, she'd insisted that he be guarded as well, and the Lord's bannermen had agreed. Many of their sons had clamoured for the honour of riding with the young wolf, as they had taken to calling him. Torrhen Casteach and his brother Eddard were among his 30, and Patrick Mallister, Smell John Umber, Darin Hornwood, Theon Greyjoy, no less than 5 of Walder Frey's vast brood, along with older men like Sir Wendell Manderly and Robin Flint. One of his companions was even a woman. Daisy Mormont, Lady Mag's eldest daughter and heir to Bear Island, a lanky 6-footer who had been given a morning star at an age when most girls were given dolls. Some of the other lords muttered about that, but Catelyn would not listen to their complaints. "This is not about the honour of your houses," she told them. "This is about keeping my son alive and whole." And if it comes to that, she wondered, will 30 be enough? Will 6,000 be enough? A bird called faintly in the distance, a high, sharp trill that felt like an icy hand on Catelyn's neck. Another bird answered, a third, a fourth. She knew their call well enough from her years at Winterfell. Snow shrikes. Sometimes you saw them in the deep of winter when the Godswood was white and still. They were northern birds. "They're coming," Catelyn thought. "They're coming, my lady," Hal Mollin whispered. He was always a man for stating the obvious. "God be with us." She nodded as the woods grew still around them. In the quiet she could hear them, far off yet moving closer. The tread of many horses, the rattle of swords and spears and armor, the murmur of human voices, with here a love and there a curse. Eons seemed to come and go. The sounds grew louder. She heard more laughter, a shouted command, splashing as they crossed and recrossed the little stream. A horse snorted, a man swore, and then at last she saw him. Only for an instant, framed between the branches of the trees as she looked down at the valley floor, yet she knew it was him. Even at a distance, Sir Jaime Lannister was unmistakable. The moonlight had silvered his armor and the gold of his hair, and turned his crimson cloak to black. He was not wearing a helm. He was there and he was gone again, his silvery arm obscured by the trees once more. Others came behind him, long columns of them, knights and sworn swords and free riders, 3/4 of the Lannister horse. "He's no man for sitting in a tent while his carpenters build siege towers," Sir Brynden had promised. "He has ridden out with his knights thrice already, to chase down raiders or storm a stubborn holdfast." Nodding, Robb had studied the map her uncle had drawn him. Ned had taught him to read maps. "Rate him here," he said, pointing. "A few hundred men, no more. Tully banners. When he comes after you, we will be waiting." His finger moved an inch to the left. "Here." Here was a hush in the night, moonlight and shadows, a thick carpet of dead leaves underfoot, densely wooded ridges sloping gently down to the streambed, the underbrush thinning as the ground fell away. Here was her son on his stallion, glancing back at her one last time and lifting his sword in salute. Here was the call of Mag Mormont's war horn, a long, low blast that rolled down the valley from the east, to tell them that the last of Jaime's riders had entered the trap. And Grey Wind threw back his head and howled. The sound seemed to go right through Caitlin's stock, and she found herself shivering. It was a terrible sound, a frightening sound, yet there was music in it too. For a second she felt something like pity for the Lannisters below. So this is what death sounds like, she thought. To east and west the trumpets of the Mallisters and Freys blew vengeance. North, where the valley narrowed and bent like a cocked elbow, Lord Castag's warhorns added their own deep, mournful voices to the dark chorus. Men were shouting and horses rearing in the stream below. The whispering wood let out its breath all at once, as the bowmen Robb had hidden in the branches of the trees let fly their arrows, and the night erupted with the screams of men and horses. All around her, the riders raised their lances, and the dirt and leaves that had buried the cruel bright points fell away to reveal the gleam of sharpened steel. "Winterfell!" she heard Robb shout as the arrows sighed again. He moved away from her at a trot, leading his men downhill. Caitlin sat on her horse, unmoving, with Hal Mullen and her guard around her, and she waited as she had waited before, for Brandon and Ned and her father. She was high on the ridge, and the trees hid most of what was going on beneath her. A heartbeat, 2, 4, and suddenly it was as if she and her protectors were alone in the wood. The rest were melted away into the green. Yet when she looked across the valley to the far ridge, she saw the Grey John's riders emerge from the darkness beneath the trees. They were in a long line, an endless line, and as they burst from the wood there was an instant, the smallest part of a heartbeat, when all Caitlin saw was the moonlight on the points of their lances, as if 1,000 will-o'-wisps were coming down the ridge, wreathed in silver flame. Then she blinked, and they were only men rushing down to kill or die. Afterward, she could not claim she had seen the battle, yet she could hear, and the valley rang with echoes. The crack of a broken lance, the clash of swords, the cries of Lannister and Winterfell and Tully, Riverrun and Tully. When she realized there was no more to see, she closed her eyes and listened. The battle came alive around her. She heard hoofbeats, iron boots splashing in shallow water, the woody sound of swords and oaken shields, and the scrape of steel against steel, the hiss of arrows, the thunder of drums, the terrified screaming of 1,000 horses. Men shouted curses and begged for mercy, and got it or not, and lived or died. The ridges seemed to play queer tricks with sound. Once she heard Robb's voice, as clear as if it had been standing at her side, calling, "To me, to me!" And she heard his dire wolf, snarling and growling, heard the snap of those long teeth, the tearing of flesh, shrieks of fear and pain from man and horse alike. Was there only one wolf? It was hard to be certain. Little by little, the sounds dwindled and died, until at last there was only the wolf. As a red dawn broke in the east, Greywind began to howl again. Robb came back to her on a different horse, riding a piebald gelding in the place of the grey stallion he had taken down into the valley. The wolf's head on his shield was slashed half to pieces, raw wood showing where deep gouges had been hacked in the oak, but Robb himself seemed unhurt. Yet when he came closer, Caitlin saw that his milk glove and the sleeve of his surcoat were black with blood. "You're hurt," she said. Robb lifted his hand, opened and closed his fingers. "No," he said. "This is Torrent's blood, perhaps, or—" He shook his head. "I do not know." A mob of men followed him up the slope, dirty and dented and grinning, with Theon and the Greyjohn at their head. Between them they dragged Sir Jaime Lannister. They threw him down in front of her horse. "The Kingslayer," Hal announced, unnecessarily. Lannister raised his head. "Lady Stark," he said from his knees. Blood ran down one cheek from a gash across his scalp, but the pale light of dawn had put the glint of gold back in his hair. "I would offer you my sword, but I seem to have mislaid it." "It is not your sword I want, sir," she told him. "Give me my father and my brother Edmure. Give me my daughters. Give me my lord husband." "I have mislaid them as well, I fear." "A pity," Caitlin said coldly. "Kill him, Robb," Theon Greyjoy urged. "Take his head off." "No," her son answered, peeling off his bloody glove. "He's more use alive than dead, and my lord father never condoned the murder of prisoners after a battle." "A wise man," Jaime Lannister said, "and honorable. Take him away and put him in irons.
Caitlin said. Do as my lady mother says, Robb commanded, and make certain there is a strong guard around him. Lord Carstek will want his head on a pike. That he will, the Greychun agreed, gesturing. Lannister was led away to be bandaged and chained. Why should Lord Carstek want him dead? Caitlin asked. Robb looked away into the woods with the same brooding look that Ned often got. He killed them. Lord Carstek's sons, Galbart Glover explained. Both of them, said Robb. Torrin and Eddard, and Darin Hornwood as well. No one can fault Lannister on his courage, Glover said. When he saw that he was lost, he rallied his retainers and fought his way up the valley, hoping to reach Lord Robb and cut him down, and almost did. He mislaid his sword in Eddard Carstek's neck after he took Torrin's hand off and split Darin Hornwood's skull open, Robb said. All the time he was shouting for me. If they hadn't tried to stop him. I should then be mourning in place of Lord Carstek, Caitlin said. Your men did what they were sworn to do, Robb. They died protecting their liege lord. Grieve for them, honor them for their valor, but not now. You have no time for grief. You may have lopped the head of the snake, but 3/4 of the body is still coiled around my father's castle. We have won a battle, not a war. But such a battle, said Theon Greyjoy eagerly. My lady, the realm has not seen such a victory since the Field of Fire. I vow the Lannisters lost 10 men for every one of ours that fell. We've taken close to 100 knights captive, and 12 lords bannermen. Lord Westerling, Lord Baneford, Sir Garth Greenfield, Lord Estrin, Sir Titus Brax, Malor the Dornishman, and 3 Lannisters besides Jaime, Lord Tywin's own nephews, 2 of his sister's sons, and 1 of his dead brothers. And Lord Tywin, Caitlin interrupted. Have you perchance taken Lord Tywin, Theon? No, Greyjoy answered, brought up short. Until you do, this war is far from done. Robb raised his head and pushed his hair back out of his eyes. My mother is right. We still have Riverrun.
Chapter 64. Daenerys. The flies circled Khal Drogo slowly, their wings buzzing, a low thrum at the edge of hearing that filled Dany with dread. The sun was high and pitiless. Heat shimmered in waves off the stony outcrops of low hills. A thin finger of sweat trickled slowly between Dany's swollen breasts. The only sound were the steady clop of their horses' hooves, the rhythmic tingle of the bells in Drogo's hair, and the distant voices behind them. Dany watched the flies. They were as large as bees, gross, purplish, glistening. The Dothraki called them bloodflies. They lived in marshes and stagnant pools, sucked blood from man and horse alike, and laid their eggs in the dead and dying. Drogo hated them. Whenever one came near him, his hand would shoot out quick as a striking snake to close around it. She had never seen him miss. He would hold the fly inside his huge fist long enough to hear its frantic buzzing. Then his fingers would tighten, and when he opened his hand again, the fly would be only a red smear on his palm. Now one crept across the rump of his stallion, and the horse gave an angry flick of its tail to brush it away. The others flitted about Drogo, closer and closer. The Khal did not react. His eyes were fixed on distant brown hills, the reins loose in his hands. Beneath his painted vest, a plaster of fig leaves and caked blue mud covered the wound on his breast. The herb woman had made it for him. Mirri Maz Duur's poultice had itched and burned, and he had torn it off 6 days ago, cursing her for a Maggie. The mud plaster was more soothing, and the herb woman made him poppy wine as well. He'd been drinking it heavily these past 3 days. When it was not poppy wine, it was fermented mare's milk or pepper beer. Yet he scarcely touched his food, and he thrashed and groaned in the night. Dany could see how drawn his face had become. Rhaego was restless in her belly, kicking like a stallion, yet even that did not stir Drogo's interest as it had. Every morning her eyes found fresh lines of pain on his face when he woke from his troubled sleep. And now this silence. It was making her afraid. Since they had mounted up at dawn, he had not said a word. When she spoke, she got no answer but a grunt, and not even that much since midday. One of the blood flies landed on the bare skin of the Khal's shoulder. Another, circling, touched down on his neck and crept up towards his mouth. Khal Drogo swayed in the saddle, bells ringing, as the stallion kept onward at a steady walking pace. Dany pressed her heels into her silver and rode closer. "My lord," she said softly. "Drogo, my son in stars." He did not seem to hear. The blood fly crawled up under his drooping mustache and settled on his cheek, in the crease beside his nose. Dany gasped, "Drogo." Clumsily, she reached over and touched his arm. Khal Drogo reeled in the saddle, tilted slowly, and fell heavily from his horse. The flies scattered for a heartbeat, and then circled back to settle on him where he lay. "No," Dany said, reining up. Heedless of her belly for once, she scrambled off her silver and ran to him. The grass beneath him was brown and dry. Drogo cried out in pain as Dany knelt beside him. His breath rattled harshly in his throat, and he looked at her without recognition. "My horse!" he gasped. Dany brushed the flies off his chest, smashing one as he would have. His skin burned beneath her fingers. The Khal's blood riders had been following just behind them. She heard Hago shout as they galloped up. Kohollo vaulted from his horse. "Blood of my blood," he said as he dropped to his knees. The other two kept to their mounts. "No," Khal Drogo groaned, struggling in Dany's arms. "Must ride. Ride. No." "He fell from his horse," Hago said, staring down. His broad face was impassive, but his voice was leaden. "You must not say that," Dany told him. "We have ridden far enough today. We will camp here." "Here!" Hago looked around them. The land was brown and sere, inhospitable. "This is no camping ground." "It is not for a woman to bid us halt," said Quotho. "Not even a Khaleesi." "We camp here," Dany repeated. "Hago, tell them Khal Drogo commanded the halt. If any ask why, say to them that my time is near and I could not continue. Kohollo, bring up the slaves. They must put up the Khal's tent at once. Quotho—" "You do not command me, Khaleesi," Quotho said. "Find Mirri Maz Dur," she told him. The god's wife would be walking among the other lamp men in the long column of slaves. "Bring her to me, with her chest." Quotho glared down at her, his eyes hard as flint. "The Magi," he spat. "This I will not do." "You will," Dany said. "Or when Drogo wakes, he will hear why you defied me." Furious, Quotho wheeled his stallion around and galloped off in anger, but Dany knew he would return with Mirri Maz Dur, however little he might like it. The slaves erected Khal Drogo's tent beneath a jagged outcrop of black rock, whose shadow gave some relief from the heat of the afternoon sun. Even so, it was stifling under the sand silk as Irri and Doreah helped Dany walk Drogo inside. Thick patterned carpets had been laid down over the ground, and pillows scattered in the corners. Eroe, the timid girl Dany had rescued outside the mud walls of the Lamp Man, set up a brazier. They stretched Drogo out on a woven mat. "No," he muttered in a common tongue. "No, no." It was all he said, all he seemed capable of saying. Doreah unhooked his medallion belt and stripped off his vest and leggings, while Jiki knelt by his feet to undo the laces of his riding sandals. Irri wanted to leave the tent flaps open to let in the breeze, but Dany forbade it. She would not have any see Drogo this way, in delirium and weakness. When her cars came up, she posted them outside at guard. "Admit no one without my leave," she told Drogo. "No one." Eroe stared fearfully at Drogo where he lay. "He dies," she whispered. Dany slapped her. "The Khal cannot die. He's the father of the stallion who mounts the world. His hair has never been cut. He still wears the bells his father gave him." "Khaleesi," Jiki said. "He fell from his horse." Trembling, her eyes full of sudden tears, Dany turned away from them. He fell from his horse. It was so, she had seen it, and the blood riders, and no doubt her handmaids and the men of her cause as well. And how many more? They could not keep it secret, and Dany knew what that meant. A Khal who could not ride could not rule, and Drogo had fallen from his horse. "We must bath him," she said stubbornly. She must not allow herself to despair. Iri, have the tub brought at once. Dorea, Eroe, find water, cool water. He's so hot. He was afire in human skin. The slave set up the heavy copper tub in the corner of the tent. When Dorea brought the first jar of water, Danny wet a length of silk to lay across Drogo's brow, over the burning skin. His eyes looked at her, but he did not see. When his lips opened, no words escaped them, only a moan. "Where is Mirri Maz Dur?" she demanded, her patience rubbed raw with fear. "Quotha will find her," Iri said. Her handmaids filled the tub with tepid water that stank of sulphur, sweetening it with jars of bitter oil and handfuls of crushed mint leaves. While the bath was being prepared, Danny knelt awkwardly beside her lord husband, her belly great with their child within. She undid his braid with anxious fingers, as she had on the night he'd taken her for the first time, beneath the stars. His belts she laid aside carefully, one by one. He would want them again when he was well, she told herself. A breath of air entered the tent as Aggo poked his head through the silk. "Khaleesi," he said, "Diandel is come, and begs leave to enter." Diandel was what the Dothraki called Zajora. "Yes," she said, rising clumsily. "Send him in." She trusted the knight. He would know what to do if anyone did. Ser Jorah Mormont ducked through the door flap and waited a moment for his eyes to adjust to the dimness. In the fierce heat of the south, he wore loose trousers of mottled sand silk and open-toed riding sandals that laced up to his knee. His scabbard hung from a twisted horsehair belt. Under a bleached white vest, he was bare-chested, skin reddened by the sun. "Talk goes from mouth to ear all over the Khalasar," he said. "It is said Khal Drogo fell from his horse." "Help him," Danny pleaded. "For the love you say you bear me, help him now." The knight knelt beside her. He looked at Drogo long and hard, and then at Danny. "Send your maids away." Wordlessly, her throat tight with fear, Danny made a gesture. Iri herded the other girls from the tent. When they were alone, Ser Jorah drew his dagger. Deftly, with a delicacy surprising in such a big man, he began to scrape away the black leaves and dried blue from Drogo's chest. The plaster had caked hard as the mud walls of the Lampman, and like those walls it cracked easily. Ser Jorah broke the dry mud with his knife, pried the chunks from the flesh, peeled off the leaves one by one. A foul, sweet smell rose from the wound, so thick it almost choked her. The leaves were crusted with blood and pus, Drogo's breast black and glistening with corruption. "No," Danny whispered as tears ran down her cheeks. "No, please, gods hear me, no!" Khal Drogo thrashed, fighting some unseen enemy. Black blood ran slow and thick from his open wound. "Your Khal is as good as dead, princess." "No, he can't die, he mustn't. It was only a cut." Danny took his large calloused hand in her own small ones and held it tight between them. "I will not let him die." Ser Jorah gave a bitter laugh. "Khaleesi or queen, that command is beyond your power. Save your tears, child. Weep for him tomorrow, or a year from now. We do not have time for grief. We must go, and quickly, before he dies." Danny was lost. "Go? Where should we go?" "Asshai, I would say. It lies far to the south, at the end of the known world, yet men say it is a great port. We will find a ship to take us back to Pentos. It will be a hard journey, make no mistake. Do you trust your cause? Will they come with us?" "Khal Drogo commanded them to keep me safe," Danny replied uncertainly. "But if he dies—" She touched the swell of her belly. "I don't understand. Why should we flee? I'm Khaleesi. I carry Drogo's heir. He will be Khal after Drogo." Ser Jorah frowned. "Princess, hear me. The Dothraki will not follow a suckling babe. Drogo's strength was what they bow to, and only that. When he's gone, Jaqen and Polo and the other Khos will fight for his place, and this Khalasar will devour itself. The winner will want no more rivals. The boy will be taken from your breast the moment he is born. They will give him to the dogs. Dany hugged herself. "But why?" she cried plaintively. "Why should they kill a little baby?"
"He is Drogo's son, and the crones say he will be the stallion who mounts the world. It was prophesied. Better to kill the child than to risk his fury when he grows to manhood."
The child kicked inside her as if he had heard. Dany remembered the story Viserys had told her of what the usurper's dogs had done to Rhaegar's children. His son had been a babe as well, yet they had ripped him from his mother's breast and dashed his head against the wall. That was the way of men. "They must not hurt my son," she cried. "I will order my cast to keep him safe, and Drogo's bloodriders will—" Ser Jorah held her by the shoulders.
"A bloodrider dies with his cull. You know that, child. They will take you to Vaz Dothrak, to the crones. That is the last duty they owe him in life. When it is done, they will join Drogo in the Night Lands."
Dany did not want to go back to Vaz Dothrak and live the rest of her life among those terrible old women, yet she knew that the night spoke the truth. Drogo had been more than her sun and stars. He had been the shield that kept her safe. "I will not leave him," she said stubbornly, miserably. She took his hand again. "I will not." A stirring at the tent flap made Dany turn her head. Mirri Maz Dur entered, bowing low. Days on the march, trailing behind the Khalasar, had left her limping and haggard, with blistered and bleeding feet and hollows under her eyes. Behind her came Quotho and Hago, carrying the god's wife's chest between them. When the blood riders caught sight of Drogo's wound, the chest slipped from Hago's fingers and crashed to the floor of the tent, and Quotho swore an oath so foul it seared the air. Mirri Maz Dur studied Drogo, her face still and dead. "The wound has festered."
"This is your work, Maggie,"
Quotho said. Hago laid his fist across Mirri's cheek with a meaty smack that drove her to the ground. Then he kicked her where she lay. "Stop it!" Dany screamed. Quotho pulled Hago away, saying,
"Kicks are too merciful for a Maggie. Take her outside. We will stake her to the earth, to be the mount of every passing man. And when they are done with her, the dogs will use her as well. Weasels will tear out her entrails, and carrion crows feast upon her eyes. The flies of the river shall lay their eggs in her womb and drink pus from the ruins of her breast."
He dug iron-hot fingers into the soft, wobbly flesh under the god's wife's arm, and hauled her to her feet. "No," Dany said. "I will not have her harmed." Quotho's lips skinned back from his crooked brown teeth in a terrible mockery of a smile.
"No? You say me no? Better you should pray that we do not stake you out beside your Maggie. You did this, as much as the other."
Ser Jorah stepped between them, loosening his long sword in its scabbard.
"Rein in your tongue, Bloodrider. The princess is still your Khaleesi." "Only while the blood of my blood still lives," Quotho told the knight. "When he dies, she is nothing." Dany felt a tightness inside her. "Before I was Khaleesi, I was the blood of the dragon. Ser Jorah, summon my cause." "No," said Quotho. "We will go, for now, Khaleesi." Hago followed him from the tent, scowling. "That one means you no good, princess," Mormont said. "The Dothraki say a man and his bloodriders share one life, and Quotho sees it ending. A dead man is beyond fear." "No one has died," Dany said. "Ser Jorah, I may have need of your blade. Best go don your armor." She was more frightened than she dared admit, even to herself. The knight bowed. "As you say." He strode from the tent. Dany turned back to Mirri Maz Dur. The woman's eyes were wary. "So you have saved me once more." "And now you must save him," Dany said. "Please." "You do not ask a slave," Mirri replied sharply. "You tell her." She went to Drogo burning on his mat, and gazed long at his wound. "Ask or tell, it makes no matter. He's beyond a healer's skills." The carle's eyes were closed. She opened one with her fingers. "He has been dulling the herd with milk of the poppy." "Yes," Dany admitted. "I made him a poultice of fire pot and sting me not, and bound it in a lambskin." "It burned," he said. "He tore it off.
The herb woman made him a new one, wet and soothing. It burned, yes. There is great healing magic in fire. Even your hairless men know that. Make him another poultice, Danny begged. This time I will make certain he wears it. The time for that is past, my lady, Miri said. All I can do now is ease the dark road before him, so he might ride painless to the night lands. He will be gone by morning. Her words were a knife through Danny's breast. What had she ever done to make the gods so cruel? She had finally found a safe place, had finally tasted love and hope. She was finally going home, and now to lose it all. No, she pleaded. Save him and I will free you, I swear it. You must know a way, some magic, some... Miri Mazdur sat back on her heels and studied Daenerys through eyes as black as night. There is a spell. Her voice was quiet, scarcely more than a whisper. But it is hard, lady, and dark. Some would say that death is cleaner. I learned that way in Asshai, and paid dear for the lesson. My teacher was a blood mage from the Shadowlands. Danny went cold all over. Then you truly are a Maggie. Am I? Miri Mazdur smiled. Only a Maggie can save your rider now, Silver Lady. Is there no other way? No other. Khal Drogo gave a shuddering gasp. Do it, Danny blurted. She must not be afraid. She was the blood of the dragon. Save him. There is a price, the god's wife warned her. You'll have gold, horses, whatever you like. It is not a matter of gold or horses. This is blood magic, lady. Only death may pay for life. Death? Danny wrapped her arms around herself protectively, rocked back and forth on her heels. My death? She told herself she would die for him if she must. She was the blood of the dragon. She would not be afraid. Her brother Rhaegar had died for the woman he loved. No, Miri Mazdur promised. Not your death, Khaleesi. Danny trembled with relief. Do it. The Maggie nodded solemnly. As you speak, so it shall be done. Call your servants. Khal Drogo writhed feebly as Rakaro and Quarro lowered him into the bath. No, he muttered. No, must ride. Once in the water, all the strength seemed to leak out of him. Bring his horse, Miri Mazdur commanded, and so it was done. Drogo led the great rat stallion into the tent. When the animal caught the scent of death, he screamed and reared, rolling his eyes. It took 3 men to subdue him. What do you mean to do? Danny asked her. We need the blood, Miri answered. That is the way. Drogo edged back, his hand on his arak. He was a youth of 16 years, whip thin, fearless, quick to love, with the faint shadow of his first mustachio on his upper lip. He fell to his knees before her. Khaleesi, he pleaded. You must not do this thing. Let me kill this Maggie. Kill her and you kill your Khal, Danny said. This is blood magic, he said. It is forbidden. I am Khaleesi and I say it is not forbidden. In Vast Dothrak, Khal Drogo slew a stallion and I ate his heart to give our son strength and courage. This is the same. The same. The stallion kicked and reared as Rakaro, Quarro, and Aggo pulled him close to the tub, where the Khal floated like one already dead, pus and blood seeping from his wound to stain the bath waters. Miri Mazdur chanted words in a tongue that Danny did not know, and a knife appeared in her hand. Danny never saw where it came from. It looked old, hammered red bronze, leaf-shaped, its blade covered with ancient glyphs. The Maggie drew it across the stallion's throat under the noble head, and the horse screamed and shuddered as the blood poured out of him in a red rush. He would have collapsed, but the man of her cause held him up. Strength of the mount, go into the rider, Miri sang as horse blood swirled into the waters of Drogo's bath. Strength of the beast, go into the man. Drogo looked terrified as he struggled with the stallion's weight, afraid to touch the dead flesh, yet afraid to let go as well. Only a horse, Danny thought. If she could buy Drogo's life with the death of a horse, she would pay 1,000 times over. When they let the stallion fall, the bath was a dark red, and nothing showed of Drogo but his face. Mirri Maz Dur had no use for the carcass. "Burn it," Dany told them. It was what they did, she knew. When a man died, his mount was killed and placed beneath him on the funeral pyre to carry him to the Night Lands. The men of her caste dragged the carcass from the tent. The blood had gone everywhere. Even the sand silk walls were spotted with red, and the rugs underfoot were black and wet. Braziers were lit. Mirri Maz Dur tossed the red powder into the coals. It gave the smoke a spicy scent, a pleasant enough smell, yet Eroe fled sobbing, and Dany was filled with fear. But she had gone too far to turn back now. She sent her handmaids away. "Go with them, Silver Lady," Mirri Maz Dur told her. "I will stay," Dany said. "The man took me under the stars and gave life to the child inside me. I will not leave him." "You must. Once I begin to sing, no one must enter this tent. My song will wake powers old and dark. The dead will dance here this night. No living man must look on them." Dany bowed her head, helpless. "No one will enter." She bent over the tub, over Drogo in his bath of blood, and kissed him lightly on the brow. "Bring him back to me," she whispered to Mirri Maz Dur before she fled. Outside, the sun was low on the horizon, the sky a bruised red. The Khalasa had made camp. Tents and sleeping mats were scattered as far as the eye could see. A hot wind blew. Drogo and Aggo were digging a fire pit to burn the dead stallion. A crowd had gathered to stare at Dany with hard black eyes, their faces like masks of beaten copper. She saw Ser Jorah Mormont, wearing mail and leather now, sweat beading on his broad, balding forehead. He pushed his way through the Dothraki to Dany's side. When he saw the scarlet footprints her boots had left on the ground, the color seemed to drain from his face. "What have you done, you little fool?" he asked hoarsely. "I had to save him." "We could have fled," he said. "I would have seen you safe to Asshai, princess. There was no need." "Am I truly your princess?" she asked him. "You know you are. God save us both." "Then help me now." Ser Jorah grimaced. "Would that I knew how." Mirri Maz Dur's voice raised to a high, ululating wail that sent a shiver down Dany's back. Some of the Dothraki began to mutter and back away. The tent was aglow with the light of braziers within. Through the blood-spattered sand silk, she glimpsed shadows moving. Mirri Maz Dur was dancing, and not alone. Dany saw naked fear in the faces of the Dothraki. "This must not be," Quotho thundered. She had not seen the Blood Rider return. Haggo and Koholo were with him. They had brought the hairless men, the eunuchs who healed with knife and needle and fire. "This will be," Dany replied. "Maggie," Haggo growled, and old Koholo who had bound his life to Drogo's on the day of his birth, Koholo who had always been kind to her. Koholo spat full in her face. "You will die, Maggie," Quotho promised, "but the other must die first." He drew his arak and made for the tent. "No," she shouted. "You mustn't." She caught him by the shoulder, but Quotho shoved her aside. Dany fell to her knees, crossing her arms over her belly to protect the child within. "Stop him!" she commanded her Khas. "Kill him!" Rakharo and Quaro stood beside the tent flap. Quaro took a step forward, reaching for the handle of his whip, but Quotho spun graceful as a dancer, the curved arak rising. It caught Quaro lower under the arm, the bright sharp steel biting up through leather and skin, through muscle and rib bone. Blood fountained as the young rider reeled backward, gasping. Quotho wrenched the blade free. "Horse Lord!" Ser Jorah Mormont called. "Try me!" His long sword slid from its scabbard. Quotho whirled, cursing. The arak moved so fast that Quaro's blood flew from it in a fine spray, like rain in a hot wind. The long sword caught at a foot from Ser Jorah's face, and held it quivering for an instant as Quotho howled in fury. The knight was clad in chainmail, with gauntlets and greaves of lobstered steel and a heavy gorget around his throat, but he had not thought to don his helm. Quotho danced backward, Arak whirling around his head in a shining blur, flickering out like lightning as the knight came on in a rush. Ser Jorah parried as best he could, but the slashes came so fast that it seemed to Dany that Quotho had 4 Araks and as many arms. She heard the crunch of sword on mail, saw sparks fly as the long curved blade glanced off a gauntlet. Suddenly, it was Mormont stumbling backward, and Quotho leaping to the attack. The left side of the knight's face ran red with blood, and a cut to the hip opened a gash in his mail and left him limping. Quotho screamed taunts at him, calling him a craven, a milkman, a eunuch in an iron suit. "You die now," he promised, Arak shivering through the red twilight. Inside Dany's womb, her son kicked wildly. The curved blade slipped past the straight one and bit deep into the knight's hip where the mail gaped open. Mormont grunted, stumbled. Dany felt a sharp pain in her belly, a wetness on her thighs. Quotho shrieked triumph, but his Arak had found bone, and for half a heartbeat it caught. It was enough. Ser Jorah brought his long sword down with all the strength left him, through flesh and muscle and bone, and Quotho's forearm dangled loose, flopping on a thin cord of skin and sinew. The knight's next cut was at the Dothraki's ear, so savage that Quotho's face seemed almost to explode. The Dothraki were shouting, Mirri Maz Dur wailing inside the tent like nothing human, Quaro pleading for water as he died. Dany cried out for help, but no one heard. Rakharo was fighting Hago, Arak dancing with Arak until Drogo's whip cracked, loud as thunder, the lash coiling around Hago's throat. A yank, and the Blood Rider stumbled backward, losing his feet and his sword. Rakharo sprang forward, howling, swinging his Arak down with both hands through the top of Hago's head. The point caught between his eyes, red and quivering. Someone threw a stone, and when Dany looked, her shoulder was torn and bloody. "No," she wept. "No, please, stop it. It's too high. The price is too high." More stones came flying. She tried to crawl toward the tent, but Kohollo caught her. Fingers in her hair, he pulled her head back and she felt the cold touch of his knife at her throat. "My baby!" she screamed, and perhaps the gods heard, for as quick as that, Kohollo was dead. Ago's arrow took him under the arm, to pierce his lungs and heart. When at last Daenerys found the strength to raise her head, she saw the crowd dispersing, the Dothraki stealing silently back to their tents and sleeping mats. Some were saddling horses and riding off. The sun had set. Fires burned throughout the Khalasa, great orange blazes that crackled with fury and spit embers at the sky. She tried to rise, and agony seized her and squeezed her like a giant's fist. The breath went out of her. It was all she could do to gasp. The sound of Mirri Maz Dur's voice was like a funeral dirge. Inside the tent, the shadows whirled. An arm went under her waist, and then Ser Jorah was lifting her off her feet. His face was sticky with blood, and Dany saw that half his ear was gone. She convulsed in his arms as the pain took her again, and heard the knight shouting for her handmaids to help him. Are they also afraid? She knew the answer. Another pain grasped her, and Dany bit back a scream. It felt as if her son had a knife in each hand, as if he were hacking at her to cut his way out. "Doreah, curse you!" Ser Jorah roared. "Come here, fetch the birthing woman." "They will not come. They say she's accursed." "They'll come or I'll have their heads." Doreah wept. "They're gone, my lord." "The Maggie," someone else said. Was that Ago? "Take her to the Maggie." "No," Dany wanted to say. "No, not that. You mustn't." But when she opened her mouth, a long wail of pain escaped and the sweat broke over her skin. What was wrong with them? Couldn't they see? Inside the tent, the shapes were dancing, circling the brazier and the bloody bath, dark against the sand silk, and some did not look human. She glimpsed the shadow of a great wolf, and another like a man wreathed in flames. "The lamp woman knows the secrets of the birthing bed," Irri said. "She said so. I heard her." "Yes," Doreah agreed. "I heard her too." "No," she shouted, or perhaps she only thought it, for no whisper of sound escaped her lips. She was being carried. Her eyes opened to gaze up at the flat dead sky, black and bleak and starless. "Please, no." The sound of Mirri Maz Dur's voice grew louder until it filled the world. "The shapes!" she screamed.
The dances!
So Jorah carried her inside the tent. Chapter 65. Arya. The scent of hot bread drifting from the shops along the Street of Flower was sweeter than any perfume Arya had ever smelled. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to the pigeon. It was a plump one, speckled brown, busily pecking at a crust that had fallen between two cobblestones, but when Arya's shadow touched it, it took to the air. Her stick sword whistled out and caught it 2 feet off the ground, and it went down in a flurry of brown feathers. She was on it in the blink of an eye, grabbing a wing as the pigeon flapped and fluttered. It pecked at her hand. She grabbed its neck and twisted until she felt the bone snap. Compared with catching cats, pigeons were easy. A passing Septon was looking at her askance. "Here's the best place to find pigeon," Arya told him as she brushed herself off and picked up her fallen stick sword. "They come for the crumbs." He hurried away. She tied the pigeon to her belt and started down the street. A man was pushing a load of tarts by on a 2-wheeled cart. The smells sang of blueberries and lemons and apricots. Her stomach made a hollow, rumbling noise. "Could I have one?" she heard herself say. "A lemon or any kind?" The pushcart man looked her up and down. Plainly, he did not like what he saw. 3 coppers. Arya tapped her wooden sword against the side of her boot. "I'll trade you a fat pigeon," she said. "The others take your pigeon," the pushcart man said. The tarts were still warm from the oven. The smells were making her mouth water, but she did not have 3 coppers, or none. She gave the pushcart man a look, remembering what Syrio had told her about seeing. He was short, with a little round belly, and when he moved, he seemed to favor his left leg a little. She was just thinking that if she snatched a tart and ran, he would never be able to catch her when he said, "You'll be keeping your filthy hands off. The gold cloaks know how to deal with thieving little gutter rats, that they do." Arya glanced warily behind her. 2 of the city watch were standing at the mouth of an alley. Their cloaks hung almost to the ground, the heavy wool dyed a rich gold. Their mail and boots and gloves were black. One wore a longsword at his hip, the other an iron cudgel. With a last wistful glance at the tarts, Arya edged back from the cart and hurried off. The gold cloaks had not been paying her any special attention, but the sight of them tied her stomach in knots. Arya had been staying as far from the castle as she could get, yet even from a distance she could see the heads rotting atop the high red walls. Flocks of crows squabbled noisily over each head, thick as flies. The talk in Flea Bottom was that the gold cloaks had thrown in with the Lannisters, the commander raised to a lord, with lands on the Trident and a seat on the king's council. She had also heard other things, scary things, things that made no sense to her. Some said her father had murdered King Robert and been slain in turn by Lord Renly. Others insisted that Renly had killed the king in a drunken quarrel between brothers. Why else should he have fled in the night like a common thief? One story said the king had been killed by a boar while hunting, another that he died eating a boar, stuffing himself so full that he'd ruptured at the table. No, the king had died at table, others said, but only because Varys the Spider poisoned him. No, it had been the queen who poisoned him. No, he had died of a pox. No, he had choked on a fishbone. One thing all the stories agreed on: King Robert was dead. The bells in the 7 towers of the great sept of Baelor had tolled for a day and a night, the thunder of their grief rolling across the city in a brass tide. They only rang the bells like that for the death of a king, a Tannis boy told Arya. All she wanted was to go home, but leaving King's Landing was not so easy as she had hoped. Talk of war was on every lip, and gold cloaks were as thick on the city walls as fleas on, well, her for one. She had been sleeping in Flea Bottom, on rooftops and in stables, wherever she could find a place to lie down, and it hadn't taken her long to learn that the district was well named. Every day since her escape from the Red Keep, Arya had visited each of the 7 city gates in turn. The Dragon Gate, the Lion Gate, and the Old Gate were closed and barred. The Mud Gate and the Gate of the Gods were open, but only to those who wanted to enter the city. The gods let no one out. Those who were allowed to leave left by the King's Gate or the Iron Gate, but Lannister men-at-arms in crimson cloaks and lion-crested helms manned the guard posts there. Spying down from the roof of an inn by the King's Gate, Arya saw them searching wagons and carriages, forcing riders to open their saddle-bags, and questioning everyone who tried to pass on foot. Sometimes she thought about swimming the river, but the Blackwater Rush was wide and deep, and everyone agreed that its currents were wicked and treacherous. She had no coin to pay a ferryman or take passage on a ship. Her lord father had told her never to steal, but it was growing harder to remember why. If she did not get out soon, she would have to take her chances with the gold cloaks. She hadn't gone hungry much since she learned to knock down birds with her stick sword, but she feared so much pigeon was making her sick. A couple she'd eaten raw before she found Flea Bottom. In the bottom there were pot shops along the alleys where huge tubs of stew had been simmering for years, and you could trade half your bird for a heel of yesterday's breed and a bowl of brown, and they'd even stick the other half in the fire and crisp it up for you, so long as you plucked the feathers yourself. Arya would have given anything for a cup of milk and a lemon cake, but the brown wasn't so bad. It usually had barley in it, and chunks of carrot and onion and turnip, and sometimes even apple, with a film of grease swimming on top. Mostly she tried not to think about the meat, once she had gotten a piece of fish. The only thing was, the pot shops were never empty, and even as she bolted down her food, Arya could feel them watching. Some of them stared at her boots or her cloak, and she knew what they were thinking. With others, she could almost feel their eyes crawling under her leathers. She didn't know what they were thinking, and that scared her even more. A couple times she was followed out into the alleys and chased, but so far no one had been able to catch her. The silver bracelet she'd hoped to sell had been stolen her first night out of the castle, along with her bundle of good clothes, snatched while she slept in a burnt-out house off Pig Alley. All they left her was the cloak she had been huddled in, the ladders on her back, her wooden practice sword, and Needle. She had been lying on top of Needle, or else it would have been gone too. It was worth more than all the rest together. Since then, Arya had taken to walking around with her cloak draped over her right arm, to conceal the blade at her hip. The wooden sword she carried in her left hand, out where everybody could see it, to scare off robbers, but there were men in the pot shops who wouldn't have been scared off if she'd had a battle axe. It was enough to make her lose her taste for pigeon and stale bread. Often as not, she went to bed hungry rather than risk the stairs. Once she was outside the city, she would find berries to pick, or orchards she might raid for apples and cherries. Arya remembered seeing some from the King's Road on the journey south, and she could dig for roots in the forest, even run down some rabbits. In the city, the only things to run down were rats and cats and scrawny dogs. The pot shops would give you a fistful of coppers for a litter of pups, she'd heard, but she didn't like to think about that. Down below the Street of Flower was a maze of twisting alleys and cross streets. Arya scrambled through the crowds, trying to put distance between her and the gold cloaks. She had learned to keep to the center of the street. Sometimes she had to dodge wagons and horses, but at least you could see them coming. If you walked near the buildings, people grabbed you. In some alleys you couldn't help but brush against the walls. The buildings leaned in so close they almost met. A whooping gang of small children went running past, chasing a rolling hoop. Arya stared at them with resentment, remembering the times she'd played at hoops with Bran and Jon and their baby brother Rickon. She wondered how big Rickon had grown, and whether Bran was sad. She would have given anything if Jon had been here to call her little sister and muss her hair. Not that it needed mussing. She'd seen her reflection in puddles, and she didn't think hair got any more muss than hers. She had tried talking to the children she saw in the street, hoping to make a friend who would give her a place to sleep, but she must have talked wrong or something. The little ones only looked at her with quick, wary eyes and ran away if she came too close. Their big brothers and sisters asked questions Arya couldn't answer, called her names, and tried to steal from her. Only yesterday, a scrawny barefoot girl twice her age had knocked her down and tried to pull the boots off her feet, but Arya gave her a crack on her ear with her stick sword that sent her off sobbing and bleeding. A gull wheeled overhead as she made her way down the hill toward Flea Bottom. Arya glanced at it thoughtfully, but it was well beyond the reach of her stick. It made her think of the sea. Maybe that was the way out. Old Nan used to tell stories of boys who stowed away on trading galleys and sailed off into all kinds of adventures. Maybe Arya could do that too. She decided to visit the riverfront. It was on the way to the mud gate anyway, and she hadn't checked that one today. The dwarfs were oddly quiet when Arya got there. She spied another pair of gold cloaks walking side by side through the fish market, but they never so much as looked at her. Half the stalls were empty, and it seemed to her that there were fewer ships at dock than she remembered. Out on the black water, 3 of the king's war galleys moved in formation, gold-painted hulls splitting the water as their oars rose and fell. Arya watched them for a bit, then began to make her way along the river. When she saw the guardsmen on the 3rd pier, in grey woolen cloaks trimmed with white satin, her heart almost stopped in her chest. The sight of Winterfell's colours brought tears to her eyes. Behind them, a sleek 3-banked trading galley rocked at her moorings. Arya could not read the name painted on the hull. The words were strange, Myrish, Braavosi, perhaps even High Valyrian. She grabbed a passing longshoreman by the sleeve. "Please," she said, "what ship is this?"
"She's the Wind Witch out of Myr," the man said.
"She's still here," Arya blurted. The longshoreman gave her a queer look, shrugged, and walked away. Arya ran toward the pier. The Wind Witch was the ship father had hired to take her home, still waiting. She'd imagined it had sailed ages ago. 2 of the guardsmen were dicing together while the 3rd walked rounds, his hand on the pommel of his sword. Ashamed to let them see her crying like a baby, she stopped to rub at her eyes. Her eyes, her eyes, her eyes, why did... "Look with your eyes," she heard Syrio whisper. Arya looked. She knew all of her father's men. The 3 in the grey cloaks were strangers.
"You,"
the one walking rounds called out.
"What do you want here, boy?"
The other 2 looked up from their dice. It was all Arya could do not to bolt and run, but she knew that if she did, they would be after her at once. She made herself walk closer. They were looking for a girl, but he thought she was a boy. She'd be a boy then. "Want to buy a pigeon?" She showed him the dead bird.
"Get out of here,"
the guardsman said. Arya did as he told her. She did not have to pretend to be frightened. Behind her, the men went back to their dice. She could not have said how she got back to Flea Bottom, but she was breathing hard by the time she reached the narrow, crooked, unpaved streets between the hills. The bottom had a stench to it, a stink of pigsties and stables and tennis sheds, mixed in with the sour smell of wine sinks and cheap whorehouses. Arya wound her way through the maze dully. It was not until she caught the whiff of bubbling brown coming through a potshop door that she realized her pigeon was gone. It must have slipped from her belt as she ran, or someone had stolen it and she'd never noticed. For a moment she wanted to cry again. She'd have to walk all the way back to the Street of Flower to find another one that plump. Far across the city, bells began to ring. Arya glanced up, listening, wondering what the ringing meant this time.
"What's this now?"
a fat man called from the pot shop. "The bells again, God's a mercy," wailed an old woman. A red-haired whore in a wisp of painted silk pushed open a 2nd-story window. "Is it the boy king that's died now?" she shouted down, leaning out over the street. "Ah, that's a boy for you. They never last long." As she laughed, a naked man slid his arms around her from behind, biting her neck and rubbing the heavy white breasts that hung loose beneath her shift.
"Stupid slut!"
the fat man shouted up.
"The king's not dead. That's only summoning bells. 1 tower tolling. When the king dies, they ring every bell in the city."
"Here, quit your biting, or I'll ring your bells," the woman in the window said to the man behind her, pushing him off with an elbow. "So who is it died, if not the king?"
"It's a summoning,"
the fat man repeated. 2 boys close to Arya's age scampered past, splashing through a puddle. The old woman cursed them, but they kept right on going. Other people were moving too, heading up the hill to see what the noise was about. Arya ran after the slower boy. "Where are you going?" she shouted when she was right behind him. "What's happening?" He glanced back without slowing.
"The gold cloaks is carrying him to the sept."
"Who?" she yelled, running hard.
"The Hand. They'll be taking his head off, Boo says."
A passing wagon had left a deep rut in the street. The boy leapt over, but Arya never saw it. She tripped and fell, face first, scraping her knee open on a stone and smashing her fingers when her hands hit the hard-packed earth. needle tangled between her legs. She sobbed as she struggled to her knees. The thumb of her left hand was covered with blood. When she sucked on it, she saw that half the thumbnail was gone, ripped off in her fall. Her hands throbbed and her knee was all bloody too. "Make way!" someone shouted from the cross street. "Make way for my lords of Redwyne!" It was all Arya could do to get out of the road before they ran her down, 4 guardsmen on huge horses, pounding past at a gallop. They wore checked cloaks, blue and burgundy. Behind them, 2 young lordlings rode side by side on a pair of chestnut mares alike as peas in a pod. Arya had seen them in the Bailey 100 times. The Redwyne twins, Sir Horace and Sir Hubba, homely youths with orange hair and square, freckled faces. Sansa and Janie Poole used to call them Sir Horror and Sir Slobber, and giggle whenever they caught sight of them. They did not look funny now. Everyone was moving in the same direction, all in a hurry to see what the ring was all about. The bells seemed louder now, clanging, calling. Arya joined the stream of people. Her thumb hurt so bad where the nail had broken that it was all she could do not to cry. She bit her lip as she limped along, listening to the excited voices around her. "The King's Hand, Lord Stark. They're carrying him up to Baelor Sept. I heard he was dead." Soon enough, soon enough. Here, I got me a silver stag, says they lop his head off." "Past time, the traitor," the man spat. Arya struggled to find a voice. "He never—" She started, but she was only a child and they talked right over her. "Fool, they ain't neither going to lop him. Since when do they nick traitors on the steps of the Great Sept?" "Well, they don't mean to anoint him no knight. I heard it was Stark killed old King Robert, slit his throat in the woods, and when they found him he stood there cool as you please, and said it was some old boar did for his grace." "That's not true. It was his own brother did him, that Renly, him with his gold antlers." "You shut your lying mouth, woman. You don't know what you're saying. His lordship's a fine true man." By the time they reached the Street of the Sisters, they were packed in shoulder to shoulder. Arya let the human current carry her along, up to the top of Visenia's hill. The white marble plaza was a solid mass of people, all yammering excitedly at each other and straining to get closer to the Great Sept of Baelor. The bells were very loud here. Arya squirmed through the press, ducking between the legs of horses and clutching tight to her sword stick. From the middle of the crowd, all she could see were arms and legs and stomachs, and the 7 slender towers of the Sept looming overhead. She spotted a wood wagon and thought to climb up on the back where she might be able to see, but others had the same idea. The teamster cursed at them and drove them off with a crack of his whip. Arya grew frantic. Forcing her way to the front of the crowd, she was shoved up against a stone of a plinth. She looked up at Baelor the Blessed, the Septon King. Sliding her stick saw through her belt, Arya began to climb. Her broken thumbnail left smears of blood on the painted marble, but she made it up and wedged herself in between the king's feet. That was when she saw her father. Lord Eddard stood on the high Septon's pulpit outside the doors of the Sept, supported between 2 of the gold cloaks. He was dressed in a rich grey velvet doublet with a white wolf sewn on the front in beads, and a grey wool cloak trimmed with fur, but he was thinner than Arya had ever seen him, his long face drawn with pain. He was not standing so much as being held up. The cast over his broken leg was grey and rotten. The High Septon himself stood behind him, a squat man, grey with age and ponderously fat, wearing long white robes and an immense crown of spun gold and crystal that wreathed his head with rainbows whenever he moved. Clustered around the doors of the Sept, in front of the raised marble pulpit, were a knot of knights and high lords. Joffrey was prominent among them, his raiment all crimson, silk and satin patterned with prancing stags and roaring lions, a gold crown on his head. His queen mother stood beside him in a black mourning gown, slashed with crimson, a veil of black diamonds in her hair. Arya recognized the Hound, wearing a snowy white cloak over his dark grey armor, with 4 of the King's Guard around him. She saw Varys the eunuch gliding among the lords in soft slippers and a patterned damask robe, and she thought the short man with the silvery cape and pointed beard might be the one who had once fought a duel for Mother. And there in their midst was Sansa, dressed in sky-blue silk, with her long auburn hair washed and curled and silver bracelets on her wrists. Arya scowled, wondering what her sister was doing here, why she looked so happy. A long line of gold-cloaked spearmen held back the crowd, commanded by a stout man in elaborate armor, all black lacquer and gold filigree. His cloak had the metallic shimmer of true cloth of gold. When the bells ceased to toll, a quiet slowly settled across the great plaza, and her father lifted his head and began to speak, his voice so thin and weak she could scarcely make him out. People behind her began to shout out, "What?" and "Louder!" The man in the black and gold armor stepped up behind father and prodded him sharply. "You leave him alone!" Arya wanted to shout, but she knew no one would listen. She chewed her lip. Her father raised his voice and began again. "I am Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Hand of the King," he said more loudly, his voice carrying across the plaza. "And I come before you to confess my treason in the sight of gods and men." "No," Arya whimpered. Below her, the crowd began to scream and shout. Taunts and obscenities filled the air. Sansa had hidden her face in her hands. Her father raised his voice still higher, straining to be heard. "I betrayed the faith of my king and the trust of my friend Robert," he shouted. "I swore to defend and protect his children, yet before his blood was cold, I plotted to depose and murder his son and seize the throne for myself. Let the High Septon and Bella the Beloved and the Seven bear witness to the truth of what I say. Joffrey Baratheon is the one true heir to the Iron Throne, and by the grace of all the gods, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and protector of the realm." A stone came sailing out of the crowd. Arya cried out as she saw her father hit. The gold cloaks kept him from falling. Blood ran down his face from a deep gash across his forehead. More stones followed. One struck the guard to father's left. Another went clanging off the breastplate of the knight in the black and gold armor. Two of the king's guards stepped in front of Joffrey and the queen, protecting them with their shields. Her hand slid beneath her cloak and found needle in its sheath. She tightened her fingers around the grip, squeezing as hard as she had ever squeezed anything. "Please, gods, keep him safe," she prayed. "Don't let them hurt my father." The High Septon knelt before Joffrey and his mother. "As we sin, so do we suffer," he intoned, in a deep swelling voice much louder than father's. "This man has confessed his crimes in the sight of gods and men, here in this holy place." Rainbows danced around his head as he lifted his hands in entreaty. "The gods are just, yet blessed Balor taught us that they are also merciful. What shall be done with this traitor, your grace?" 1,000 voices were screaming, but Arya never heard them. Prince Joffrey, no, King Joffrey, stepped out from behind the shields of his king's guard. "My mother bids me let Lord Eddard take the black, and Lady Sansa has begged mercy for her father." He looked straight at Sansa then, and smiled, and for a moment Arya thought that the gods had heard her prayer, until Joffrey turned back to the crowd and said, "But they have the soft hearts of women. So long as I'm your king, treason shall never go unpunished. Sir Ilyn, bring me his head." The crowd roared, and Arya felt the statue of Baela rock as they surged against it. The High Septon clutched at the king's cape, and Varys came rushing over waving his arms, and even the queen was saying something to him, but Joffrey shook his head. Lords and knights moved aside as he stepped through, tall and fleshless, a skeleton in iron mail, the king's justice. Dimly, as if from far off, Arya heard her sister scream. Sansa had fallen to her knees, sobbing hysterically. Sir Ilyn Payne climbed the steps of the pulpit. Arya wriggled between Baela's feet and threw herself into the crowd, drawing needle. She landed on a man in a butcher's apron, knocking him to the ground. Immediately, someone slammed into her back and she almost went down herself. Bodies closed in around her, stumbling and pushing, trampling on the poor butcher. Arya slashed at them with needle. High atop the pulpit, Sir Ilyn Payne gestured and the knight in black and gold gave a command. The gold cloaks flung Lord Eddard to the marble, with his head and chest out over the edge. "Here, you!" An angry voice shouted at Arya, but she bowled past, shoving people aside, squirming between them, slamming into anyone in her way. A hand fumbled at her leg and she hacked at it, kicked at shins. A woman stumbled and Arya ran up her back, cutting to both sides. But it was no good, no good. There were too many people. No sooner did she make a hole than it closed again. Someone buffeted her aside. She could still hear Sansa screaming. Sir Ilyn drew a two-handed greatsword from a scabbard on his back. As he lifted the blade above his head, sunlight seemed to ripple and dance down the dark metal, glinting off an edge sharper than any razor. Ice, she thought. He has ice. Her tears streamed down her face, blinding her. And then a hand shot out of the press and closed round her arm like a wolf trap, so hard that needle went flying from her hand. Arya was wrenched off her feet. She would have fallen if he hadn't held her up, as easy as if she were a doll. A face pressed close to hers, long black hair and tangled beard and rotten teeth. "Don't look," a thick voice snarled at her. I... Arya sobbed. The old man shook her so hard her teeth rattled. "Shut your mouth and close your eyes, boy." Dimly, as if from far away, she heard a noise, a soft sighing sound as if a million people had let out their breath at once. The old man's fingers dug into her arm, stiff as iron. "Look at me. Yes, that's the way of it, at me." Sour wine perfumed his breath. "Remember, boy?" It was the smell that did it. Arya saw the matted greasy hair, the patched, dusty black cloak that covered his twisted shoulders, the hard black eyes squinting at her. And she remembered the black brother who had come to visit her father. "Know me now, do you? There's a bright boy." He spat. "They're done here. You'll be coming with me and you'll be keeping your mouth shut." When she started to reply, he shook her again, even harder. "Shut, I said." The plaza was beginning to empty. The press dissolved around them as people drifted back to their lives. But Arya's life was gone. Numb, she trailed along beside. Yoren! Yes, his name is Yoren. She did not recall him finding Needle until he handed the sword back to her. "Hope you can use that, boy." "I'm not," she started. He shoved her into a doorway, thrust dirty fingers through her hair and gave it a twist, yanking her head back. "Not a smart boy, that what you want to say?" He had a knife in his other hand. As the blade flashed toward her face, Arya threw herself backward, kicking wildly, wrenching her hat from side to side, but he had her by the hair, so strong she could feel her scalp tearing, and on her lips the salt taste of tears. Chapter 66. Bran. The oldest were men grown, 17 and 18 years from the day of their naming. One was past 20. Most were younger, 16 or less. Bran watched them from the balcony of Master Luwin's turret, listening to them grunt and strain and curse as they swung their staves and wooden swords. The yard was alive to the clack of wood on wood, punctuated all too often by thwacks and yowls of pain when a blow struck leather or flesh. Sir Roderick strode among the boys, face reddening beneath his white whiskers, muttering at them one and all. Bran had never seen the old knight look so fierce. "No," he kept saying. "No, no, no." "They don't fight very well," Bran said dubiously. He scratched Summer idly behind the ears as the dire wolf tore at the haunch of meat. Bones crunched between his teeth. "For a certainty," Master Luwin agreed with a deep sigh. The master was peering through his big mirrorish lens tube, measuring shadows and noting the position of the comet that hung low in the morning sky. "Yet given time. Sir Roderick has the truth of it. We need men to walk the walls. Your lord father took the cream of his guard to King's Landing, and your brother took the rest, along with all the likely lads for leagues around. Many will not come back to us, and we must needs find the men to take their places." Bran stared resentfully at the sweating boys below. "If I still had my legs, I could beat them all." He remembered the last time he'd held a sword in his hand, when the king had come to Winterfell. It was only a wooden sword, yet he'd knocked Prince Tommen down 100 times. "Sir Roderick should teach me to use a poleaxe. If I had a poleaxe with a big long haft, Hodor could be my legs. We would be a knight together." "I think that unlikely," Master Luwin said. "Bran, when a man fights, his arms and legs and thoughts must be as one." Below in the yard, Sir Roderick was yelling.
You fight like a goose. He pecks you and you peck him harder. Parry. Block the blow. Goose fighting will not suffice. If those were real swords, the first peck would take your arm off.
One of the other boys laughed, and the old knight rounded on him.
You laugh. You. Now that is gall. You fight like a hedgehog.
There was a knight once who couldn't see, Bran said stubbornly, as Sir Roderick went on below. Old man told me about him. He had a long staff with blades at both ends, and he could spin it in his hands and chop 2 men at once.
Simeon Stareyes,
Lewin said as he marked numbers in a book.
When he lost his eyes, he put star sapphires in the empty sockets, or so the singers claim. Bran, that is only a story, like the tales of Florian the Fool, a fable from the age of heroes.
The master tsked.
You must put these dreams aside. They will only break your heart.
The mention of dreams reminded him. I dreamed about the crow again last night, the one with 3 eyes. He flew into my bedchamber and told me to come with him, so I did. We went down to the crypts. Father was there, and we talked. He was sad.
And why was that?
Lewin peered through his tube. It was something to do about John, I think. The dream had been deeply disturbing, more so than any of the other crow dreams. Hodor won't go down into the crypts. The master had only been half listening, Bran could tell. He lifted his eye from the tube, blinking.
Hodor won't
go down into the crypts. When I woke, I told him to take me down, to see if Father was truly there. At first he didn't know what I was saying, but I got him to the steps by telling him to go here and go there. Only then he wouldn't go down. He just stood at the top step and said, Hodor, like he was scared of the dark, but I had a torch. It made me so mad I almost gave him a swat in the head, like old Nan is always doing. He saw the way the master was frowning and hurriedly added, I didn't, though.
Good. Hodor is a man, not a mule to be beaten.
In the dream I flew down with the crow, but I can't do that when I'm awake, Bran explained.
Why would you want to go down to the crypts?
I told you, to look for Father. The master tugged at the chain around his neck, as he often did when he was uncomfortable.
Bran, sweet child, one day Lord Eddard will sit below in stone, beside his father and his father's father, and all the Starks back to the old kings in the north. But that will not be for many years, gods be good. Your father is a prison of the Queen in King's Landing. You will not find him in the crypts.
He was there last night. I talked to him.
Stubborn boy.
The master sighed, setting his book aside.
Would you like to go see?
I can't. Hodor won't go, and the steps are too narrow and twisty for Dancer.
I believe I can solve that difficulty.
In place of Hodor, the wildling woman Osha was summoned. She was tall and tough and uncomplaining, willing to go wherever she was commanded. I live my life beyond the wall. A hole in the ground won't fret me none, my lords, she said. Summer, come. Bran called as she lifted him in the wiry, strong arms. The dire wolf left his bone and followed as Osha carried Bran across the yard and down the spiral steps to the cold vault under the earth. Master Lewin went ahead with a torch. Bran did not even mind, too badly, that she carried him in her arms and not on her back. Sir Roderick had ordered Osha's chain struck off, since she had served faithfully, and well, since she had been at Winterfell. She still wore the heavy iron shackles around her ankles, a sign that she was not yet wholly trusted, but they did not hinder her sure strides down the steps. Bran could not recall the last time he had been in the crypts. It had been before, for certain. When he was little, he used to play down here with Robb and John and his sisters. He wished they were here now. The vault might not have seemed so dark and scary. Summer stalked out in the echoing gloom, then stopped, lifted his head, and sniffed the chill dead air. He bared his teeth and crept backward, eyes glowing golden in the light of the master's torch. Even Osha, hard as old iron, seemed uncomfortable. Grim folk, by the look of them, she said as she eyed the long row of granite Starks on their stone thrones. They were the kings of winter, Bran whispered. Somehow it felt wrong to talk too loudly in this place. Osha smiled. Winter's got no king. If you'd seen it, you'd know that, summer boy.
They were the kings in the north for thousands of years,
Master Lewin said, lifting the torch high so the light shone on the stone faces. Some were hairy and bearded, shaggy men, fierce as the wolves that crouched by their feet. Others were shaved clean, their features gaunt and sharp-edged as the iron long swords across their laps. Hard men for a hard time. Come. He strode briskly down the vault, past the procession of stone pillars and the endless carved figures. A tongue of flame trailed back from the upraised torch as he went. The vault was cavernous, longer than Winterfell itself, and Jon had told him once that there were other levels underneath, vaults even deeper and darker where the older kings were buried. It would not do to lose the light. Summer refused to move from the steps, even when Osha followed the torch, Bran in her arms. "Do you recall your history, Bran?" the master said as they walked. "Tell Osha who they were and what they did, if you can." He looked at the passing faces and the tales came back to him. The master had told him the stories, and old Nan had made them come alive. "That one is Jon Stark. When the Sea Raiders landed in the east, he drove them out and built a castle at White Harbor. His son was Rickard Stark, not my father's father, but another Rickard. He took the neck away from the Marsh King and married his daughter. Theon Stark's the real thin one with the long hair and the skinny beard. They called him the Hungry Wolf because he was always at war. That's Sir Brandon, the tall one with the dreamy face. He was Brandon the Shipwright because he loved the sea. His tomb is empty. He tried to sail west across the Sunset Sea and was never seen again. His son was Brandon the Burner because he put the torch to all his father's ships in grief. There's Roderick Stark, who won Bear Island in a wrestling match and gave it to the Mormonts. And that's Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. He was the last king in the north and the first lord of Winterfell, after he yielded to Aegon the Conqueror. Oh, there, he's Cregan Stark. He fought with Prince Aemon once, and the Dragon Knight said he'd never faced the finest swordsmen." They were almost at the end now, and Bran felt a sadness creeping over him. "And there's my grandfather, Lord Rickard, who was beheaded by Mad King Aerys. His daughter Lyanna and his son Brandon are in the tombs beside him. Not me, another Brandon, my father's brother. They're not supposed to have statues, that's only for the lords and the kings, but my father loved them so much he had them done." "The maid's a fair one," Osha said. "Robert was betrothed to marry her, but Prince Rhaegar carried her off and raped her," Bran explained. "Robert fought the war to win her back. He killed Rhaegar on the Trident with his hammer, but Lyanna died, and he never got her back at all." "A sad tale," said Osha. "But those empty holes are sadder." "Lord Eddard's tomb for when his time comes," Master Luwin said. "Is this where you saw your father in your dream, Bran?" "Yes." The memory made him shiver. He looked around the vault uneasily, the hairs on the back of his neck bristling. Had he heard a noise? Was there someone here? Master Luwin stepped toward the open sepulchre, torch in hand. "As you see, he's not here, nor will he be for many a year. Dreams are only dreams, child." He thrust his arm into the blackness inside the tomb, as into the mouth of some great beast. "Do you see? It's quite empty." The darkness sprang at him, snarling. Bran saw eyes like green fire, a flash of teeth, fur as black as the pit around them. Master Luwin yelled and threw up his hands. The torch went flying from his fingers, caromed off the stone face of Brandon Stark, and tumbled to the statue's feet, the flames licking up his legs. In the drunken shifting torchlight, they saw Luwin struggling with the dire wolf, beating at his muzzle with one hand while the jaws closed on the other. "Summer!" Bran screamed. And Summer came, shooting from the dimness behind them, a leaping shadow. He slammed into Shaggy Dog and knocked him back, and the two dire wolves rolled over and over in a tangle of grey and black fur, snapping and biting at each other, while Master Luwin struggled to his knees, his arm torn and bloody. Osha propped Bran up against Lord Rickard's stone wolf as she hurried to assist the master. In the light of the guttering torch, shadow wolves 20 feet tall fought on the wall and roof. "Shaggy!" a small voice called. When Bran looked up, his little brother was standing in the mouth of Father's tomb. With one final snap at Summer's face, Shaggy Dog broke off and bounded to Rickon's side. "You let my father be," Rickon warned Luwin. "You let him be." "Rickon," Bran said softly. "Father's not here." "Yes, he is. I saw him. Tears glistened on Rickon's face. I saw him last night. In your dream? Rickon nodded. You leave him be. He's coming home now, like he promised. He's coming home. Bran had never seen Master Luwin look so uncertain before. Blood dripped down his arm where Shaggy Dog had shredded the wool of his sleeve and the flesh beneath. Osha, the torch, he said, biting through his pain, and she snatched it up before it went out. Soot stains blackened both legs of his uncle's likeness. That beast, Luwin went on, is supposed to be chained up in the kennels. Rickon patted Shaggy Dog's muzzle, damp with blood. I let him loose. He doesn't like chains. He licked at his fingers. Rickon, Bran said, would you like to come with me? No, I like it here. It's dark here, and cold. I'm not afraid. I have to wait for Father. You can wait with me, Bran said. We'll wait together, you and me and our wolves. Both of the